Pardon Appeal. Darcy-John Bouchard, copyright July 1, 2015, Canada. Attached document. 2. Measurable benefit/sustained rehabilitation form. By Darcy-John Bouchard. MZE. For the purpose of a record suspension application. 1. Clearly indicate how a record suspension would provide you with a measurable benefit and how it would sustain your rehabilitation into society as a law-abiding citizen. I imagine that if I were actively a practicing alcoholic or a drug abuser and had more dealings with those negative social influences, thence I shouldst, perhaps, have had more encounters with the local authorities, but I don't. And I stay out of trouble because I avoid troubled souls as a matter of habit and have done so for the better part of this last decade. Thus, as such, I feel deserving of the second chance a record suspension wouldst provide me, so as that I am dealt with as a law-abiding citizen whence encountered by authorities, or, otherwise, in the event that unforeseen opportunities arise in the future, such as if I were to by chance publish my writing, as it were in the United States, and travel, and a passport was necessary, for example, or else, as if I were to be in a position to improve my lot in life with a credit check, which is ofttimes necessary even in certain volunteer positions. As for being rehabilitated into society, methinks this applieth more so to tame which have been excluded from law-abiding society for a time and served terms in prisons, and being not so much concerned with someone such as myself which hath not been incarcerated away from society, but all this while, instead, having paid my fines and made my restitution, whereas it was necessary, have never been denied freely participating in the community as a law-abiding citizen, albeit with criminal charges. 2. Describe all positive changes you have already made to improve your situation since your conviction. You may include supporting documents. After injuring my right ankle, in Regina, circa fall 1991, I began going lame, and have difficulty walking nowadays. I must rely on a cane. I have a head injury sustained in a midnight assault in Regina, SK, in 1998, which hospitalized me, therefore I may not remember dates exactly. In 2002, I was attacked by an AIDS-infested junkie at a busy Main Street intersection in downtown Victoria, BC, and beaten over the head with my cane, so that it broke into 3 pieces. Outside of this event, I have had little involvement with the police since my last charge. I rarely, if ever, consume alcohol, the beginnings of all my troubles, and, if so, never to excess. I keep to myself, and thereby avoid bad company. I am quite content to remain alone, shut in my room, engaged in creative writing or painting. I began painting, in oils, in Calgary, in 1996, and have created hundreds of fine oil paintings which are scattered across Canada, mostly portraiture. Since moving to Victoria, in 1991, I have written several manuscripts, which are all in various stages of editing or revision. Topics include 1. Cross-referencing scripture, biblical passages, with their original proto-historic and ancient world hieroglyphic and cuneiform sources. 2. Long, narrative poems, especially those based on history or with theological and philosophical references. 3. Collections of other poems, including many sonnets and divers shorter lyric poems and prose, including prayers. 4. A translation of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and 5. Histories of New France and the Métis people. Currently, I am engaged in genealogical research, being most interested in Acadia, the first French family and the Métis families of the South Branch of date. A few years ago, whilst living in Nanaimo, BC, I enrolled in a high school equivalency upgrading program at Malspina Collegiate. After a few months, at the end of the course, I was advanced to a university entrance level for my English skills, but, my grade 10 math skills were wanting. I only managed to pass with special help, and after much difficulty, this was my 7th or 8th attempt. I will have to try to finish Math 11 and 12 if I want to further my education, as I cannot meaningfully labor, because of my head injury and lameness. And so, it seems, there are few options left for me to advance my status in life. As such, I recognize that keeping out of trouble is the first and easiest step to take in improving my own direction in life. To this end, I think my record since arriving in Victoria over 10 years ago speaks for itself. I am not interested in trouble or troublemakers. In lieu of supporting documents, I have attached an appropriate sample of my writing, at the end of this document. 3. Information on the offences. Describe the circumstances and how/why each of the offences was committed. 1 November 2, 1979 Saskatoon, SK carry concealed weapon sector 87 cubic centimeters, 14-month suspended sentence and probation. The first time I ever got drunk I was 16, I stole my father's 40-ounce Canadian club and dared a friend to dare me to jug a lug, drink in one gulp, which he did and which I did. Note, I had only been living with my father and his second wife for a short while and was a troubled kid. My friend didn't know what to do. He took me to my grandparents' home that night, and my grandmother sat up and nursed me all night long, but I never learned my lesson and became a problem drinker. On the night in question, I, age 17, got drunk on a bottle of wine for the first time. That night I ended up fighting with a group of native persons. I went home in a drunken stupor to get a club I had, a Dungeons & Dragons prop made out of a billiards cue ball taped to half of a pool cue to create a wand/mace, and I went in search of my foes. I walked over the bridge and went downtown, but soon lost interest in seeking out more trouble and elected to go into a late-night pizza joint for a package of cigarettes. I imagine, now, retrospectively, that if I had just walked in using my stick as a cane things would have turned out differently, but, instead, I stuck it down into my pant leg to hide it before entering. I hadn't misbehaved, so. I don't know why. But they called the cops on me. I imagine they thought I had a rifle, and I got arrested, charged, and processed. This was by no means an isolated incident. I was often incarcerated in the drunk tank for my delinquent behavior at that time of my life. Besides the suspended sentence and probation, I spent some time for alcohol rehabilitation in Calder Centre in Saskatoon, and, later on, I also visited the Angus Campbell Centre in Moose Jaw, SK. But, still continued to drink to excess. 2 May 7, 1986 Saskatoon, SK Mischief Sector 387, 4, CC Saskatoon PD 23623, $100. I, D 14 days, 9 Mo's probation and $150 restitution. I had control over the direction of my life, or so I thought. I was meaningfully employed, apprenticing, for no wage but at no cost to me, the carriage trade of all breed dog, and cat, grooming. I hadn't drank in a long while, and was exercising regularly, so when I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in a long time, I didn't think twice about having a drink, but that was a mistake, because I had never learned how to drink socially, and one drink was never enough, so, we ended up at a party, and I got really very drunk, and ate some LSD, too. Lots and lots of LSD. The last thing I remember of that night was hallucinating, attacking moving vehicles, at least yelling at passing motorists, and then the police came. Lots and lots of police. They grabbed me and wrestled me down, and as they were putting me into the back of a police car, I kicked out the back door window of the patrol car. Still, looking back, I can see how well they treated with me. I wasn't maced or tozzered or beaten up, despite my bad punk rock character. I believe that I was not well behaved that night and remained a problem prisoner all throughout the night, but was dealt with very patiently by the police. 3 October 29, 1998 Saskatoon, SK driving with more than 80 mgs of alcohol in blood sector 253, B, CC Saskatoon PS 23623, $400. I, D 8 days and 1 year prohibition from driving. For a brief time in my life I was in possession of a valid driver's license. This night, a longtime friend and myself ended up on a spontaneous road trip to Saskatoon, our residence being in Regina, but we had nowhere to go. We got drunk and trusted to chance in the spirit of adventure, which was a terrible mistake, because I ended up driving the vehicle while intoxicated. Lucky for us, a cop pulled us over before I could do any real damage, and I was arrested. My friend's mom's car was impounded, and my friend was stranded alone in Saskatoon with nowhere to go. It was some time and expense before they got it out of impound. All in all, the road trip was a bad idea. I never bothered to renew my Class 4 license. For May 3, 2000, Regina, SK, 1, Obstruction Sector 129, A, CC, 2, Mischief under $5,000 Sector 430, 4, CC Regina PS 44439, 1, $100 I, D 2 days, 2, suspended sentence and probation 1 year. In June 1998, I was attacked in an alley late one night. In Regina, I was struck on the head and grievously beaten by 2 men, robbed of my buckskin jacket, and left for dead. I suffer from this head injury every day. I suppose if I had the details before me, concerning this charge of obstruction and mischief, I could probably recall these events, but although I have troubled my mind, I have no certain memory of this incident, and do not care to speculate or guess. I draw comparison between the attack and having no memory, as I feel they are related. It seems peculiar that the other older incidents are more precisely recounted, but this more recent event evades recollection. To be blunt, it is a headache, no pun intended, but I suffer from migraines since the cowardly attack, trying to remember this incident. I am sorry. Postscript, I had written the above information, but then remembered a document journaling daily events in my life as an artist, and once I'd checked it, I learned I'd been in courtroom number 4, at 2 p.m. It was written with my left hand, for, apparently, my right hand had been in a cast since April 25. There were references to paintings and poems, etc., but nothing concerning an obstruction or mischief or arrest. I googled Obstruction Sector 129, A, CC, and the result brought to mind an incident whence a certain badge officer claimed that my slipping on the ice as he manhandled me to his patrol car was assault. He was removing me from a backyard which I'd mistakenly wandered into whilst lost in a strange neighborhood. I'd slipped on snow/ice and accidentally kicked him on the ankle/in the shins. Please remember that I'd been lamed since 1991, although at this time I did not walk with a cane. Of course, I was drunk. I have no excuse for my behavior. I was drunk, I was in the wrong place, and my actions were disorderly. It was early in the morning, the sun was just rising, and I was there at banging on the back door of a new friend's house, but, as I was drunk, I did not know that I was at the wrong house. I could see someone inside, but they would not come to the door. If they had, I would have learned that I was at the wrong place, and would have gone away, but, instead, she called the cops. I could see her through a curtained back door window on the phone calling the cops, but I reckon I thought she was too busy talking on the phone to come and answer the door. So I waited. And the police officer mentioned arrived and I was arrested. And, as he was taking me to the patrol car, I slipped on the snow and/or ice. In the aforementioned document, it is noted to have recently snowed, at least once on the 9th and/or the 10th, and there was thunder and lightning on the 17th or 18th, moon phases, people's names listed. There were a lot of notations, but nothing to help me remember anything more of this event. So, if I am wrong venturing to reminisce a guess concerning this issue before you, please forgive me. I am sorry. Lazar and divesly veden diversly. And divers gurden hadden they thereby. Chaucer, The Summoner's Tale, 1877-78. Invocation. In the name of the one true God, most gracious, ever merciful. O hear, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Proclaim, God is most great. God is most great. Testify, there is no God but Him, the living, the eternal, the Almighty, the immaterial, the all-powerful, the all-pervading and benevolent, the omnipotent Lord of the worlds, the author of heaven and earth. In accordance with the requirements of Ma'at, truth, justice, righteousness, and wisdom. Praise belongs to God, the Creator of life and death, in whose hand is dominion and irresistible power. Holy is He, and exalted far above that which we associate with Him. The peaceful, the faithful, the guardian over His servants. The shelterer of the orphan and the widow, the guide of the erring. The deliverer from every affliction, the friend of the bereaved. The consoler of the broken-hearted and the reliever of all distress. In His hand is good, and He is the generous Lord. The hearer, the near at hand, the compassionate, the very forgiving. Whose love for man is more tender than that of a mother bird for her young. 'Tis He we worship and He we ask for help. Is He not closer than the vein of thy neck? Thou needest not raise thy voice, for He knoweth the secret whisper, and what is yet more hidden. He knows what is in the land and in the sea, no leaf falleth but He knoweth it. Nor is there a grain in the darkness under the earth. Nor a thing green or sere, but it is recorded, in the sight of the Lord. All men are equal. The decree of God is at hand, so seek ye not to hasten it. He sends down His angels with revelation by His command. On whomsoever He pleases, directing, Thou art man. Cry recite in the name of thy Lord. Who created everything? Who created man from a clot of coagulated blood, from a drop of fluid? Cry. For thy Lord is wondrous kind and most beneficent. Who by the pen hast taught mankind things they knew not, being blind. Who points out the right way, for some ways are devious, the straight path. Of those whom He hast favored, not the crooked nor the corrupt path. Of those whom have incurred His anger nor of those whom have gone astray. Had He enforced His will, He would have guided us all. 2. To everyone we have given a law and a way, and if we had pleased, we would have made you, all mankind, one people but have done otherwise, that we might try you in that which we have given unto thee, wherefore press forward unto good works. Unto us thou shalt return. And we shall tell you that concerning which thou dost disagree. We have created man committed to toil. Does he think no one has power over him? He says, I have spent enormous wealth. Does he think no one watches him? Have we not given him 2 eyes, and a tongue and 2 lips? And pointed out to him the 2 highways of good and evil? Prostrate thyself and draw near to us. Extol the perfection of God the Most Great. All who are in heaven and faithful on the earth celebrate our praises, and the birds, too, spreading out their wings, each one knoweth its prayer and praise. Thanks be to our Lord, He is the adorable, and only to be adored. Our Lord, the ever-existing, the cherisher, the true sovereign, whose mercy and might overshadow the universe. The regulator of the world, and the light of creation. His is our worship. He existed before all things, and will exist after all that is living hast ceased. 3. Thou art to be adored, my Lord, Thou art the Master, the loving. O my Lord! Thou art present everywhere to help and protect thy servants. O my Lord! Thou art and I am only created, the beseecher, the sinner. O my Lord! Grant me the love of thee, and grant that I may love thee. Grant that I may love those that love thee. Grant that I may do the deeds that win thy love. Make thy love to be dearer to me than the love of self, family, or than wealth. Read, Exodus ch 3 and Job ch 21. Call now. Who will answer to you? And to whom of the saints will you turn? Job 5:1. Behold! Abraham said, O my Lord, show me how thou givest life to the dead. Quran Surah 2:260. Iratum 2021-09-16 Note, 1 erroneous date changed from 1997 to 1998 and 1 footnote censored, asterisk. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice the magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Revelation 21:8. Pardon appeal. Darcy-John Bouchard. July 1, 2015. Opening statement. I shouldst care to thank you for this privileged opportunity the board has given me to present my case to argue my eligibility, here in this document attempting to prove to you, reader, that I not only meet the legal requirements to obtain a record suspension as set out under the provisions of the Criminal Records Act, but deserve to have my record suspended, and that the supposition that the ordering of a record suspension, in my particular case, would bring the administration of justice into disrepute is erroneous. I hope to prove to you that I have been of good conduct and that my behavior has consistently demonstrated a law-abiding lifestyle, at least since my DUI, in 1998. Furthermore, it is my intention to persuade you that I am undeserving of every charge laid against me since then, especially the alleged sexual assault, in 1998, a charge which, being unfounded and improvable since it was a fabrication by parties attempting to frame me and bring the character of my good name into question and disrepute, I deal with this woebegone matter in some detail, for it has, in particular, wrought the suspicion of the board that if in so granting me the requested record suspension I wouldst put the administration of justice into disrepute. But that is just not the case. More so, it is my intention to assuage thy prejudiced suspicions by explaining the nature of my criminal behavior so as to alter your preconceived sentiments concerning the nature and gravity of my criminal offending by disproving the allegation of sexual assault, 1998, and the obstruction and mischief charges, 2000, and the post-conviction liquor offense, 2006, in familiarizing you with certain facts hitherto unheard of by you which are pertinent to establishing my innocence in these unfounded charges. I wouldst care to draw to your attention to the fact that the board has reviewed my application and found me to have met the criteria as set out in legislation to deserve a record suspension, based on the information which I previously submitted for the board's approval in 2012, viz. Measurable benefit/sustained rehabilitation form. I would like to thank my youngest half-brother Maurice Lee Bouchard for financing this project and making it possible for me, if not to justly clear my name of those wrongful charges which I have mentioned and shall hereafter explain in more detail, then to at least to opportune your trust and faith and understanding and belief that I am not culpable but proven capable of rehabilitation as a law-abiding citizen and of good conduct and behavior that is consistent with and demonstrates a law-abiding lifestyle. After assessing all the available information before you, discounting my version of events, which you so graciously have given me the opportunity to respond now, here in this document, the board, for some unknown reason, reversed its prior decision in my favor, becoming confusing and was not satisfied that I met the legal requirements to obtain a record suspension etc. Noting the alleged sexual assault charge in particular, for which no charges were ever laid, and for which I don't even remember being called to appear before Her Majesty's court to answer the charge, which was apparently stayed in court, thereby, I feel I was denied opportunity to clear my good name of this heinous allegation, an outrageous lie which I have only learned about through you, and that's exactly what it is, an unsubstantiated allegation and nothing more. Of which, therefore, I was denied my constitutional rights to face mine accusators and make mine arguments then, there, at the time of the supposed offence. And, being no fault of my own, this miscarriage of justice hath of itself brought the administration of justice into disrepute. I will begin in refuting the sexual touching allegation by familiarizing you with the personae involved, then explain the circumstances of the matter, giving a brief bit of background information, and comment, giving a few examples of others who've found themselves in similar situations, prior to making final remarks. Then I will dwell briefly on the post-conviction liquor offence, 2006, and close with a summary of my criminal behavior. I find it interesting that the board reviewed my application and found that I would gain a measurable benefit from a record suspension and that the ordering of a record suspension would sustain my rehabilitation as a law-abiding citizen. The board mentions an isolated incident, in 2006, and concludes that I still meet the criteria of good conduct since my last conviction. Yet, the board, upon reviewing the nature, gravity, and duration of my offences as well as the circumstances surrounding the commission of my offences, noting an alleged sexual assault, in 1998, believes that the ordering of a record suspension might risk putting the administration of justice into disrepute. In this document, I mention some few instances wherein the administration of justice needeth no help from me in bringing itself into disrepute. Especially in the issue concerning Regina City badge officers Ron and Terry, who grievously beat me up, in 1997, and left me for dead in a dark alley less than a block from the very place where St. Louis David Riel de Métis was hanged. Again, the administration of justice needeth no help from me in bringing itself into disrepute. This felonious incident, I argue, shouldst in itself establish enough reasonable doubt in the minds of any reviewer to discredit the alleged sexual assault charge, especially since, by your own practice of finding innocent people guilty without trial. I say that this is the same mindset as was present during the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the persecution of Roche, etc. Or the unlawful jailing of Alfred Dreyfus, or the hanging of the poor little gypsy of Nika, Atifa Sahali, for example. Is the mere conjecture of an allegation equivocal to establishing one's guilt? Furthermore, I find it unconscionable that I be further wrongfully persecuted for an allegation made against me, when it is the foundation of the law that no person be found guilty without a trial and that people are innocent until proven guilty. Neither fundamental constitutional right has been allotted me in this instance. You have declared me guilty of the alleged offence without me having had opportunity to speak in my defence, which even the Magna Carta finds reprehensible. And, in doing so, you strip me of my legal constitutional rights as citizen. Thus, methinketh, I am being denied justice, even as I was denied necessary medical care, infer, by the Regina City Police Department, when I was taken from the hospital and unjustly jailed by the same two badge officers which grievously assaulted me, as mentioned above and elsewhere in this document. Please note that this degenerate judgmental finger-pointing does not risk putting the administration of justice into disrepute, it actually does put the administration of justice into disrepute, as it did in the Stephen Truscott case, him, age 14, being sentenced to death by hanging in 1959 for the rape and murder of classmate Lynn Harper. He continued to maintain his innocence until, in 2007, his conviction was declared a miscarriage of justice and he was formally acquitted of the crime. Though not declared factually innocent, or of Guy Paul Morin, who was wrongfully convicted of murdering a 9-year-old girl, in 1984, and sentenced to life imprisonment only to be vindicated 14 years later, in 1998, when DNA evidence cleared him of the charge, or Thomas Sofanow, another innocent man who spent nearly 4 years imprisoned before being cleared, in 2000, and there are many other wrongfully convicted men which have been unjustly jailed in Canada only to be later exonerated, but once you're branded, you're branded for life, so that even if y'all should choose to suspend my record, this ghastly charge shall e'er hang over my head like a Damoclean dagger. The rush to judgment undermines the presumption of innocence, the fundamental right that guarantees the accused be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Yet, I have been assumed heinously guilty, unreasonably so too, and have not had opportunity to prove my innocence, me being well kept silent in a cloud of unknowing and at unawares of this charge laid against me until this present time. According to Rumney, Cambridge Law Journal, pages 140 to 142, 10% of allegations of rape in Canada are false. Of course, due to varying definitions of false allegations, the true percentage of these false accusations remains unknown. I assure you, neither am I guilty in this alleged sexual assault, nor of the wrongful obstruction/mischief charge laid against me by Badge Officer Yi, in 2000. Note: as far as concerns the 2006 post-conviction liquor offence, my argument will be made at the end of this document, but, I assure you, I do not believe that this charge against me, which resulted in no charge at all after an unwarranted night sober in the Huskow, wherein my personal property, viz., my laptop computer was illegally searched and damaged by the on-duty officers, who hurried me out of lockup so as I shouldst not discover the damage before leaving, whereby they could deny any Damage having been done by them, and I gladly left as quickly as possible in my eagerness to comply, thus, I didst not notice the damage until after arriving home, where I directly went. The damage they had done rendered the computer useless. Does not this, too, put the administration of justice into disrepute, or are you going to disregard it as heresy to call lie, an unsubstantiated allegation? I say that my computer was illegally searched because no warrant to search was ever produced, nor did I ever give them reason to search, for I was well behaved and compliant the whole time that I was in their custody. Yet what recourse did I have? As the saying goes, they fucked me over like a little bitch. And they so willingly disrespected themselves in this to the extent of behaving like delinquent children trying to hide the mess they made before caught being up to no good, again, putting administration of justice into disrepute. Should I have complained, whose word do you think would have been taken as truth-saying, and by whom? Who shouldst I have complained to? The police. My complaint was of them, and who am I to them? Less than nothing, and according to my record, a would-be rapist, of all things. And what happened the last time I had recourse to complain of unjust, nay, criminal treatment by persons of authority? I was laughed to scorn. Concerning mine accusators in the sexual touching allegation, I have never had the opportunity to familiarize me with this particularly nasty bit of injustice, as it has only recently been brought to my attention by you that this problem existed for me. When called to answer to the charge by the Regina City Police, in 1998, methought the whole affair dealt with to the fullest extent then. I had no idea that this charge besmirched my permanent record, and it bothers me much. For the charge is false, and those whom have perjured this charge against me are liars, and nothing more. To the best of my recollection, the three parties involved in this conspiracy against me were Michael Hanna, Aaron Walker, and an unknown young lady. I think it stinks that I have been singled out for this negative attention, when it was both Hanna, a married man, and Walker, a dubious character, which were fucking around with this little strumpet, and not me. I am simply a gullible dupe which hath been framed, and the accusation was even stayed by Her Majesty. And I can only think of one reason why the alleged sexual assault charge was stayed, and that's because the judge was obviously not convinced of my guilt in the matter, or, in other words, the judge was obviously convinced of my innocence in the matter. My much younger cousin Michael Lloyd Hanna, son of my favorite aunt, whom my beloved grandmother oft lived with, hereafter called Yabbit, as this was something he wouldst oft repeat during conversation, him repeatedly saying Yabbit, and ya know what I mean more so than day. He was a small man with a big prick, which, in itself, is a small thing, but he was not only extremely proud of this, but he wanted the whole world to know about it, because it was his only redeeming quality. If you'd call it such, and he had an even bigger mouth which never shut up once engaged. Yabbit was a regular Dirk Diggler. Note, Dirk Diggler, loosely based on the life of John Holmes, is a fictional well-endowed porn star who finds fame and fortune in the world of sex and drugs, as played by actor Mark Wahlberg in the popular mainstream film Boogie Nights, 1997, which featured sex symbol Burt Reynolds. Yabbit had no hesitation or humility about sharing every lurid detail about his many sexual exploits and virginal deflowerations, which I'd the misfortune of hearing about ever since he was a horny young rooster and worse than a fox loose in the hen house, but he was family. And him being much younger, I felt responsible for him since childhood and thus remained loyal to him despite his shortcomings. Today, though, I am very glad to say that I've had nothing to do with the frogmouth for almost 20 years, since about the same time that these awful allegations were first made against me. Yet, this is not the issue which caused me to disassociate me with he. I did so because the treacherous little puke struck me at unawares like the snake he is. The dirty sod has even broken his poor mother's arm when she denied him money. Yabbit was always a self-obsessed jerk, even as a child, and I am better off without him in my life. Good riddance to bad rubbish. I doubt very much that this ignoramus read even one book in his entire life. I had made friends with Harry Aaron Walker about 1995. Here noted, it was on October 9, 1997 that Harry Aaron Victor Walker pleaded guilty to assault with a weapon and received a sentence of 2 years less a day in the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan. R.V. Walker, 1997 SKCA. Docket 7263, dated 19971023, the Court of Appeal for Saskatchewan, Quorum, Van Seas, Shurstobytoff and Lane LLA. Harry Aaron Victor Walker, Appellant, and Her Majesty the Queen, Respondent, Counsel, Mr. Walker for himself and Mr. D. Rayner for the Crown. Van Seas L.A., orally 1 Harry Aaron Victor Walker pleaded guilty to assault with a weapon and received a sentence of 2 years less a day. 2 excerpts, found sleeping on the job and fired, and he was upset, and he and the CO accused, after a bout of drinking, decided on revenge and wearing ski masks, and found the victim asleep and began assaulting him and sprayed him with pepper spray before leaving him. 3 Mr. Walker, who was on probation at the time of the assault, was arrested and after being released on bail fled to Ontario. 5 The Crown contends that the sentence imposed by the trial judge was fit to protect those persons vulnerable in society. 7 Excerpt, the CO accused received a $250 fine. 8 Excerpts, the accused appealed, and, failing to comply with a condition to keep the peace and be of good behavior, without lawful excuse, received a concurrent sentence of 6 months, etc. We weren't best friends nor even close friends, but were more than acquaintances, and had drank and smoked pot together on more than one occasion. When Walker was lunatic and incarcerated by his own military/politically connected father, who may or may not be Honorary Lieutenant Colonel A. Walker, CD of the Saskatchewan Dragoons, I managed to visit him in the nut bin, and was happily welcomed by him. Yes, we were friends until the little bastard turned traitor on me. One night I got pissed up on beer and tokes and LSD and went to visit him, bringing beer and tokes to share with him. He wanted LSD also, so I took him to the home of the stranger I'd just met so that he, too, could acquire some LSD and trip out with me, man. I brought beer and tokes with us to share with the dealer as well, but he wanted all my weed and used the beer bottle I'd given him to hit me on the head, smashing the bottle over my face and cutting me so that I was bleeding into my eyes. Turns out the goof was scheduled to go into the can the next day, and he wanted to party it up. I never had a chance to defend myself and never fought back, though, primarily because one of the assailants was the dealer's younger brother, and just a kid, and I didn't want to strike such a young goober. I just wanted to leave, so I left the case of beer and struggled to the door and tried to get my boots on to leave, fending off blows and kicks the whole while. I had to leave my boots, though, and went outside in sock feet, even though it was colder than hell outside, being the dead of winter. The dealer followed me outside and continued to push me into fighting. Finally I surrendered my little packet of marijuana to the thug and was able to get away, him throwing my boots after me as I staggered away. I was quite disorientated, as not only was I stoned out of my mind but also suffering from a concussion, and the jerk, my good buddy Aaron Walker, chose to side with the dealer whom only he'd just met, and abandoned me to wander dazed and confused alone through the dark, cold night in a strange neighborhood, him remaining with the dealer, his new pal, to smoke the weed they'd stolen from me and drink the beers which I had brought to share. And me? I wandered disorientated, stoned out of my mind, confused from having a beer bottle broken against my head, with blood in my eyes and on my face, in a strange neighborhood, Sounds like a fun time, No. It really sucked the boar's hind tit, let me tell you. So. I didn't like Walker the traitor anymore, and, after the lowlife bag of scum took up with a young lady of my acquaintance, whom I was quite fond of then, and am still friends with today, I spoke out against him to her, warning her of the snake, but young love, and forbidden love at that. This is one of the reasons that Walker tried to sully my good name and reputation on more than one occasion. Hereafter I call Walker Noman, naming him such because I was ordered by the court on some trumped-up charge by him to stay at least a block away from him, and had to go out of my way and walk around his place just to get home, thus I named him such, after this so-called no man's land wherein the court ordered me not to set foot, more so than methought him no man at all, albeit just as true. It's kind of funny, though, why no, how Noman had no hesitation in approaching me if and whenever he wanted to. Despite this court order for me to stay away from him. As far as the young woman is concerned, I barely knew her, and still don't know her name, nor do I want to, and I doubt if she knows my name, much less remembers me or the incident in question. I call her Miss Beaster for lack of any other name, because of the beastly effect she's had/having on my life. I hold her not in any unkind disregard, nor do I harbor any harsh thoughts or feelings towards her, despite it all, not then and neither now. On the night in question, I had been drinking and, after having talking with Yabbit on the phone, I went to visit my cousin, as I had been invited, thinking him alone at home with his family, his wife, Rosetta Sucher, and her young son, Andrew, age 5 or so. But Rosetta wasn't home. And Yabbit was passed out on a chair in the living room when I got there. I could see young Miss Beaster from the living room through an open bedroom door. She was fully naked, laying uncovered on top their marriage bed. But methought nothing of it, as Yabbit was adulterous by his very nature, and, as I've mentioned, the Sybarite was proud of his debauched prolifications. I really don't know why she claimed that I'd sexually touched her, nor that she'd kicked me in the balls. But I do know that I was not interested in sloppy seconds with the little tramp, so that's probably her motivation for making these allegations against me. Instead of fucking around with her, I went straightway into my nephew's room and crashed with him in his bunk bed, which was not unusual. There was neither any sexual touching on my part, nor any kick to my nuts on hers, both statements being fabrications, which shall be dealt with more so in the following paragraphs. In the morning, there were no problems. It wasn't until a few days later, that on coming home, I found a notice stuck to my door ordering me to present me at the cop shop, which I did, and it was then I first learned of the allegation against me. But, as nothing more came of it, I thought the issue a matter closed and long ago forgotten, until you the board brought it up, which is why I'm penning this letter to you now. Concerning the alleged offense. It's interesting that the board chose to assume me guilty without a trial based on the allegations of this promiscuous liar, her in a criminal conspiracy with her fuck friends, those other sexual deviants, Yabbit and Noman. Now, methinkest that Yabbit and Noman had gotten into some kind of argument over the phone, an altercation in which my name was mentioned, and that Yabbit threatened to shoot Noman with a shotgun or vice versa. But I was never able to find out what actually happened or why such accusations were leveled against me. Nonetheless, I was for a long time unjustly persecuted by rumor-mongering badge officers employed by the City of Regina Police Department, which manipulated every circumstance and opportunistically fraudulent statements to conform facts of any issues to fit their own biased, and racist, agenda of fear-mongering hatred, to arrest and/or detain me whenever convenient for them to do so. Prior to this unfortunate incident, 2 cops had approached me one day on the street, where I was sitting and panhandling with the anarchids, and these screws made unwarranted inquiries into my buckskin jacket with long sleeves and fringes, which was a topic of concern amongst certain members of the police. I thought it strange then, but it soon made more sense. Reminiscent of the reign of terror in the Red River settlement after the 1869 Red River Rebellion, when the fledgling postage stamp province of Manitoba was suffering its birth pangs, amongst the numerous Franco-Métis which suffered reprisals was André Nault, one of the principal Métis. Although he was fully French Canadjun, he was attacked in Pembina by soldiers and left for dead. So, too, was Gabriel Dumont once attacked in his sleep by Canadian interlopers. I would like to point out other instances wherein the administration of justice has been brought into disrepute by its representatives by stating for the record the many assaults and unmitigated violence of the Red River Expeditionary Force in Manitoba, assault and incarceration of Honorable Pierre Poitras and Honorable François-Xavier Page, assault on Father François-Xavier Kavanagh, assault of Wabishka Morin, assault on Thomas Spence, murder of Elzir Goulet, aggravated sexual assault against Laurette Gullet, arson attack on the home of James Ross. Vigilante squads of RREF called the public to mob law with chants of death to Catholics and death to half-breeds etc. Assault on Young Seer, assault on Romain Nault and lynching of a man named Landry, murder of Reverend James Edwin Tanner, aggravated assault of David Tate and companions, arson perpetrated against Robert Tate, aggravated assault on Toussaint Vaudry and Joseph McDougall, arson attack on the home of Maurice Loman, reputed. Murder of François Guillemette, murder of Hugh Francis Boboloni, arson attack on the offices of the Manitoban newspaper, aggravated assault against André Nault Métis, Supra, invasion of Andrew McDermott's home, assault against Frederick Bird, assault against Thomas Bunn, aggravated sexual assault against Marie-Laure Rivière, a First Nations man was beaten and his wife and daughters raped, aggravated assault against Louis Hibbert, assault against James Wicks Taylor, the American Council in Winnipeg, assault against Baptiste Lapini, harassment of William B. O'Donoghue, harassment of Julie Lagimotier Riel, attempted assassinations of Louis Riel and Ambroise Didime Lapini, attacks on Maxime Lapini, Pierre Levely and André Nault, invasion of Madame Goulet's home and aggravated assault against Alphonse Carrier and Maxime Goulet, assault against Maïs Normand and Joseph Germain, aggravated assault against Crown Attorney Joseph Dubuc, tarring and feathering of James Curtis Bird. Burning down the home of Annie McDermott Bannatyne and AGB Bannatyne, mob violence and Canadian usurpation of property. There is no God. There is only the law. Good and evil do not exist outside the law. Javert, Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, TV series 1978. Note: the two men which I'd previously mentioned, in the document attached to my measurable benefit/sustained rehabilitation form, as having left me for dead in a dark alley were also badge officers, CSTS Ron and Terry, which, knowing full well that I was out and about downtown that night, hunted me down in their squad car, finding me in my hiding place, and grievously beat me, robbing me of my coveted buckskin jacket with long sleeves and fringes, leaving me for dead in a dark alley. Later, after I'd struggled alone, about a mile to the General Hospital, in an utter state of shock with my head puffed out like a black and blue pumpkin so that I had no neck, commonly referred to by men such as these as a pumpkin head, it was these very same two corrupt cops which came to investigate, for reasons still unknown to me, they took me away in heavy fetters and handcuffed. They drove me to city cells in absolute silence, detained me in a cell with a malfunctioning sink and denied me necessary medical care. My mandible had been broken by the two uniformed criminals, and I sat there until morning, unable to find any sort of rest, constantly thinking that the cops were going to escape me, or kill me, and make it look like I had initiated a violent struggle, and, when the bastards finally did take me back to the hospital, no one from the police department ever came to interview me, nor even later. Thus, I lay abed for 3 days in a near comatose state, unable to move. My body was covered from head to foot in long red welts and sore bruises from their cruel batons. My father took me to a lawyer, and got I no help. I went to a psychologist, and I got no help. I was sent away from Saskatchewan Justice, and told that the incident didn't happen. But it did happen, and it happened during the second annual Canam Police Firefighters Games, too, whence there was only an acting chief of police in charge of the Regina City Police Department and the administration was already in chaos and turmoil because of it, as rumor hadst it, the chief of police had been involved in sex scandal involving a teenager in a Calgary park. But what is a rumor? Hearsay, just that and nothing more, an allegation, and how does that differ from the allegations made against me, et. When policemen break the law, then there isn't any law, just a fight for survival. Billy Jack to corrupt town boss Mr. Posner. Billy Jack, Tom Laughlin, independent film, 1971. Mark yet, whilst I was in the hospital recovering, my apartment was illegally invaded by certain members of the Regina City Police Department and illegally searched, and, thereafter, I was oft harassed by cops who'd invent reasons to detain and or arrest me, which is exactly what happened when Officer Yee arrested me for being drunk in public, for which I was charged, tried, found guilty and sentenced to community service in lieu of a fine. The sob was handling me too roughly, which is why I slipped on the snow and ice, accidentally kicking him. But it was his word against mine, which is why I was charged, and convicted, et. A few months later, bodies began turning up on a Saskatoon golf course. The pigs were driving the savages 10 or so miles out of town down a long, lonely road past the garbage dump to the Queen Elizabeth Power Station, taking away their shoes and coats, beating them senseless and leaving them there in the cold darkness to make their way home along the cold, desolate riverside through the snow back into town. But these filthy sixers were rewarded with a paid vacation during trial and then declared innocent, ha! Just like happened in the Martinsville sex scandal some years earlier. So much for bringing the administration of justice into disrepute, et. Furthermore, there are notable occurrences of similar false allegations of sexual assault and or rape which have happened to such as, Bata, brother of Anne Pugh, whose wife attempted to seduce Bata but was rebuked by him, so she lied to her husband, telling him that his brother had tried to seduce her, and Anne Pugh tries to kill him. Tale of Two Brothers, or Joseph of the Technicolor Dreamcoat in the household of Potiphar, the captain of the palace guard, whose wife, Zuleika, attempted to seduce him and, rebuked, falsely accused him of attempted rape. Thus was Joseph cast into prison. Genesis and Curran, or, as King Proteus' wife Antea lusted for Bellerophon, but when the hero refused her sexual advances, she told her husband otherwise and Proteus conspired to have him murdered. Homer, Iliad, or as Hippolytus, bastard son of Theseus, was falsely accused of raping his stepmother, Phaedra, and killed by his father, Euripides. Hippolytus, or as the adulterous Queen Guinevere, accuses the good knight Lanville of shaming her, Marie de France. Lanville, or as the Red Cross Knight, is falsely accused by Duessa the witch. Spenser, Fair Queen, Book 2, or as Count Gualtieri of Antwerp, a widower, who was governing the kingdom of France whilst the king and the king's son were away fighting in Germany, and the wife of the king's son fell in love with him but was rejected. Thus, the wicked woman's love burned savage and she accused him of raping her and he was forced to flee to England with his daughter. The story ends with the wife of the king's son revealing that she'd falsely accused Gualtieri in her deathbed confession. Boccaccio, Decameron, or as Tom Robinson, a nigger, was falsely accused of raping a white woman, and, although proven innocent by Atticus Finch during trial, he was convicted by a racist jury and later killed escaping lawful custody. Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird, or even as American silent film actor Fatty Arbuckle, who was falsely accused of the rape and murder by Virginia Rapp, in 1921, and his life consequently ruined, him going to an early grave. That women falsely accuse men of sexual assault/rape is nothing new to the world, and is exactly what has happened in this situation concerning me. I did not sexually assault the young lady, neither did I threaten her life, and the people which used their authority to frame me for having done so are the very same people which harassed me often, even going so far as to viciously beat me nigh unto death, rob me and leave me as one dead in a cold, dark alley. I have learned to live with this great miscarriage of justice, and shouldst you chose to continue to unjustly persecute me, I will learn to live with that too. In the end, though, I will be vindicated and the administration of justice will indubitably be proven to have brought itself into disrepute. If I were to write my story and be blessed with the good fortune of being published, who do you think the hoi polloi wouldst believe, and when, if so, my art begins to merit attention, do you not think that people will ask questions about me? A bit of background. I had moved to Regina from Victoria, BC, about 1990, where I'd been living for a couple of years after giving up on the whole idea of punk rock, and involved myself in the local arts community, participating as a volunteer and board member and exhibiting artist, having emerged as a performing artist 10 years earlier. I have been in the habit of visiting the public library ever since I was just a wee kid. Now, in Regina, I'd walk the mile or so to the downtown library quite often, why no, and oft-times take out an armfuls of books, and not cheap popular mainstream novels, either, but intelligent reading material, as I have always been interested in history, literature, philosophy, and religion. I had to pass through Victoria Park in city centre, whereat was the cenotaph, in memory to the dead soldiers of WWI, World War II, and the Korean War. Never once didst I not make time to sit down, no matter what the weather, rain, sun, snow, day or night, it didn't matter to me, and share a smoke with the dead soldiers. This is something I always did growing up in Saskatoon, as well, having taken up smoking at the very tender age of 7 or 8 whilst in grade 2 or 3, so the practice was nothing new to me. Besides being able to find and smoke discarded butts, stores wouldst then keep their tobacco products out in the open, where we brats couldst easily steal them. As far as smoking butts, this is something that I have continued doing all my life, even unto the recent past, but I haven't touched tobacco products for several years now, just like I haven't touched alcohol for several years. It was in Victoria Park, some 7 years later, that I first encountered the hitchhiking squeaky kids, and over time we befriended each other. I had been suffering from schizophrenia and paranoia for many years, and wasn't even able to go into a mall, even though I grew up one of the original mall rats in Saskatoon's Midtown Plaza. But, these sweet street kids helped me through my mental troubles, having me sit with them in the missions or the park or panning, although I never squeakied, et. Today, because of their help then, I am able to ignore the negative thoughts and paranoia which once dragged me down, and now that I smoke medical marijuana, I have stopped having Tourette-like seizures, which have bothered me since childhood. You may ask what these kids saw in me so that they trusted me enough to crash on the floor of my downtown art studio, et. And that is because I never tried to fuck any of them over, and for the most part, neither did they fuck me over, except for the exceptional few problematic losers. Instead, we talked of art and poetry. I encouraged some to return to their homes, others, though, threw their lives away pursuing drug addiction in the bigger cities in Canada, and some of these little critters have died because of their addictions, but not many, not like the kids of today, which have surrendered themselves wholeheartedly to the risky lifestyles associated with faggotry, homelessness, and addiction to dangerous drugs like crack, cocaine, heroin, and crystal methamphetamine. It should be noted that I am still friends with many of these young anarchids, most of which now have young families of their own. 3 of the young girls of my fellowship, 2 of them mothers now and another a successful entrepreneur, even painted a huge canvas with me whilst I yet resided in the J.M. Duncan residence, a heritage building which has been since demolished. The J.M. Duncan residence was built for J.M. Duncan, who came west from Ontario in 1882 with his brothers Albert and William. It was constructed in 1905, and he lived there until 1915. Duncan was a town councillor, 1884–85. In 1907, the residence was given the address, 2076 Scarth Street, Regina. Duncan was a sheriff of the judicial district, and involved with the Supreme Court in the district of Assiniboia, 1908–13. In 1913, Duncan moved out, and the Sisters of Charity moved in, renaming the place, Rosary Hall, which operated as a home for the wayward young women of that era until 1968. The building was next used as a dry-out center for recovering alcoholics, at a time when the savages were melting shoe polish and old 78 records to make booze. When the squeaky kids were staying with me, they had already been in the house for some time, upstairs with the dirty drunkards which traded booze and drugs for sexual favors, or did their best to do so. I was living in the old dining room, which was about 10 times bigger than most of the other rooms. It was on the ground floor. The other men didn't like me because of this and because I was good to the street kids which they'd grown accustomed to abusing. These arseholes wouldn't let them in when they tried to visit me, so I just left my windows open and they crawled in and out of them at their leisure, whether I was home or not. And I never had any troubles, nor did anyone ever believe in the alleged charges made by Miss Beester and her compatriots against me, nor were there any other such allegations made of me, although I was oft alone with many a young maiden and squire whilst I resided in Regina. Yet, there were a plenty of complaints made by these fine youngsters against the police for corruption, harassment, and just plain outright bullying. My studio was right in the heart of downtown Regina, a block away from the place they hanged St. Louis David Riel de Métis, and half a block away from the place where Ron and Terry Grievous assaulted and robbed me and left me for dead, and, although the windows were always opened, no idiots ever crawled in them to steal or cause problems. Note: the night of my attempted murder by CSTS Ron and Terry, I had been at home but was restless, so I went for a long walk to the park that night, it being about midnight, more or less. The only people in the park were rowdy drunks, cops from the Canam Games, which had begun a day or two before. It was about the time that I had been approached by the two unidentified uniformed cops whilst sitting with the street kids panhandling, these inquiring into my buckskin jacket with long sleeves and fringes, so, this why I guess it had been a topic of discussion amongst them and their compatriots, et. It was apparently no coincidence that these two made such invasive inquiries, or that Ron and Terry later stole the buckskin jacket off my near-dead and nigh-comatose body before abandoning me to my uncertain fate, to live or die, they cared not. Anyhow, I had found a nice bottle of expensive champagne which some of the off-duty cops had stolen from one of the local nightclubs and left at Faffard's giant buffalo sculpture, on Scarth Street Mall, and to celebrate my good fortune I began to search out a pokey thing to jab the cork down into the bottle so that I might partake the champagne. It was shortly after finding the pokey thing that Ron and Terry found me in my hiding place, as if they knew exactly whereat I was, et. When these two dirty pigs hunted me down, for, in fact, they knew that I was out and about downtown and had been looking for me in a squad car, which is the only reason they were able to find me in my hiding place. They began to make all sorts of indecent inquiries into my fellowship with the young park brats, and then I realized what was going on. So I called them out and blatantly told them that they were only harassing me because they were jealous, because the greater majority of the young anarchids were white, and I knew from my short time driving hack that the cops were in the habit of taking out and or breaking in the young half-breed and Indian girls which made the mistake of following their older sisters out to the stroll. For them, it was either put out or spend the night in the can, et. And the one son of a bitch verbally agreed with me, and that is when I was struck the first time. I don't really know which one hit me on top of the head with his baton, especially since, having a flashlight shining in my eyes, I couldn't see anything. All I can recall is falling down from the terrible blow, with the two monsters falling on top of me, crossing my legs and kneeling of them so that I was on my stomach and couldn't get up, and they beat me with their clubs fiercely, up and down my whole body, mercilessly concentrating on beating me on my knees and elbows and ribs. Then the two brutes tried to strip my buckskin jacket off me, and I resisted, going tense, which brought on a second, even more violent beating with their clubs. Finally, I was beaten unconscious, and stripped, like Joseph, of my buckskin jacket with long sleeves and fringes. I regained consciousness only long enough to see those two bastards standing there together and holding my jacket between them. I growled and pushed myself up off the ground. I didn't care if they were cops or not. I was going to kick their asses, but one of them, the blonde one, methinks, kicked me in the face hard enough to break my mandible. I went unconscious, and had an out-of-body experience. Whereof I floated out of my body, watching both the culprits holding my buckskin jacket. These two animals then disappeared and I was in darkness. It may have been cold and damp, but I am uncertain of this now. Then, after a long time alone in this emptiness of being, as I dissipated and dissolved, lessening, I beheld a light and it appeared before me as a large circular portal out of which emerged the sacred blue lady, who saith unto me, "What should do in dark? Wrigglin' about in the muck fur like a worm. Whyn should get up and walk like a man," and this I did. And they crucified him, and parted his garments, casting lots for them. Gospel of Matthew 27:35. When I came to, I don't know when. I struggled as best as I was able to stagger to the general hospital. Man, were those nurses freaked out when I stumbled into emergency. They thought I'd been hit by a truck. I was in bad shape, and in shock. I won't go into details, because it's not important, but for some reason which I was never told the cops were called, and when they arrived and saw who I was and what they had did to me, they were afraid. So I was fettered and cuffed by them, and taken to city cells, etc. Several weeks later, a young native girl named Darcy, having her uncle with her, felt brave enough to tell me that she had been present for the beating, and that ex-con Gordon McMain, the man in chains, a self-confessed triple murderer, had brought her with him, and that they had both been with the constabulary when I was beaten, and that she and he had participated in beating me using a 2x4. But it was irresponsible of me to involve the youngster any more than she had done so herself, and so as to protect her, I sloughed off her story and told her that I remembered things well enough, and that I didn't remember her there. Although, it was the man in chains which had only few days prior to their beating the shit out of me introduced me to CSTS Ron and Terry, who were at that time uniformed and in possession of a patrol car, telling me, "You can get the pigs to do anything you want if you know how to talk to them." Furthermore, isn't it ironic that the Calvinator, of all my friends and acquaintances, was with me whence I returned to the scene of their dastardly crime, where I found a few tassels off my buckskin jacket. What was ironic is that in just over 10 years later, this very same man, Calvin McLean, 43, who'd just stepped out to get some cigarettes a few blocks away, was murdered in front of his wife by 4 of the uniformed bastards. The poor man, who was unarmed, was chased down, beaten so bad that he had broken ribs and a broken sternum, and drowned in pepper spray. So, I say, how can pardoning me cause disrepute to the administration of justice? Or, any more disrepute than it has already cloaked itself in? Please note, I had many fiends at that time, not just the street kids. I still had friends in the arts community and had a good relationship with certain shopkeepers, especially Tame, which allowed me to hang my fine oil paintings in their cafes, many everyday type of people, and some of the bums, too, which had been my friends for years before my making acquaintance with the anarchids. We created an oil painting together, and it was entitled Starless Night by one of these young gaming elk gutter snipes. Any other artist would have been commemorated by the arts community, but oh no, not me. For I had been unostentatiously ostracized by them because I dared to speak out openly against the unfair specialized consideration shown to the faggy and feminist artists by the municipal, provincial, and federal arts boards, although my art was no worse than any others and better than most. Furthermore, I would have probably advanced my arts career further if I'd been or if I was more sexual active, but I wasn't. I was then, as I have always been, with the exception of the short time I was involved in my father's taxi-cab venture, as I am now, a practicing celibate. And Lord only knows, if, when I emerged as an artist, I were to have been one of their faggy artsy-fartsy bum buddies, I'd probably be a recognized Canadian artist today, instead of a squalid panhandling bum and, according to my criminal record, a degenerate criminal. You may ask what I saw in these anarchids. Well, when I was a lot younger, in the 80s, I was involved in the new wave/punk rock scene. It is important to note that at the time of my emergence as an artist, some years earlier, I had been more open-minded and supported homosexual rights and the multicultural agenda, both of which I now no longer support and openly oppose as fervently as I oppose pedophiliacs and Sharia law in Canada. In fact, it is because I learned well enough to openly oppose homosexual rights and the multicultural agenda that I was ostracized from the arts community in the first place. Furthermore, I was an integral part of the band, and, although I argued left, right and center that we present ourselves as a bar band, the younger members of the group preferred we pursue an alternative course of action, so, we played all ages gigs instead. And, though I was popular with the artsy college girls more so than the squeaky Twinkies, I was an ascetic and a practicing celibate, which undermined my status in the arts community, for it's not what you know but who you're fucking that matters. Thus, I was quite familiar with the younger mindset by the time I met the squeaky kids, many of which I painted or interested in the arts, enriching their lives and in so doing, unknowingly enriching my own future. For many of these brilliant young people are still my friends today some 18 years later. Also, I met many of their parents and was accepted by them and often held counsel with some of them concerning their children, like the mother of little G girl, Jen, who had the misfortune of falling prey to a dangerous offender and suffering much abuse thereby, or young Tyler, which social services workers and police came uninvited into my home and took away. After hours alone sitting in their waiting room, he simply got up and returned, and we had no more troubles with them after that. Both, today, are parents and goodly members of our society. It's strange, but of all my old artist and punker friends I only remain close to three, one which I had previously known when I emerged as an artist, one which I met as a punker, and another whom I met whence I was a practicing artist in Regina before being ostracized. My real friends, though, are or were the kids of the squeaky generation, principally young women who are now mothers, many of which either stayed with me or actually lived with me at one time or another and were never once in any sort of danger but instead were given a safe haven and undying love. Today, here in Victoria, I'm friends with very few people, being poor and surrounded by nothing but dirty bums and stupid junkies and ugly whores, as is not unusual in living so close to the edge. Thus, knowing practically no one of social significance, I prefer to remain isolated and shut in, as I was before emerging as an artist in the early 80s, whence I was first diagnosed as schizophrenic. A comment. I know you will never remove the black spot of this alleged sexual assault from my record, and that I am forever stained by this outrageous lie which hath been whispered from mouth to ear about me, this outspoken crime which hath been perpetrated against me by the ignorant runaway street girl, beaster, an adulteress and prostitute, and both her scummy fuck friend conspirator, Yabbit and Noman, and those detestable cops which sought not any kind of justice at all for either the girl or myself, but, instead, did nothing more than opportune to make use of her to suit their own agenda of injustice, and stir the shit up good so that the stank has risen up high enough to disgust even your nostrils now, a score of years later. How do you think Tamar seduced Judah? Just as did the propoetides of the Milite cult, as has happened since long before the first cave artist painted red ochre on the cavern walls in France, long before the antediluvian cuneiform tablets and papyrus scrolls suffered destruction during the deluge, long before Hammurabi declared lex talionis as the law of the land, and long before Moses the horned lawgiver carved the 10 Commandments, and long before recorded history, as will continue to happen long after you, dear reader, and I are dead and forgotten. Such is human nature, such is life. Note, as I've mentioned, the goddam dirty cops in Regina and Saskatoon were in the custom of making use of the poor little First Nations girls which followed their older sisters out onto the stroll to prostitute the favors of their flesh for money, alcohol, and drugs, these same dirty whiter cops believing it their kingly prerogative to deflower any young virgin they desired, taking whichever one of them they lusted for into the back seat of their cruiser. I say whiter but do not refer to the Caucasian flesh, rather I mean to infer the inferior wasp mentality that pervades the prairies, or, the thin blue line which hath existed since the Northwest Mounted Police first came to steal the land from the Indians and the Métis, and the wholesale murder the buffalo-based culture which had endured for centuries on the great interior prairies long before the eastern capitalists built their railroads and began filling the stolen homeland with Galician and Bukovinian pioneers. My Ukrainian Baba and Guido came to the New World with great hopes in 1898. They were placed on South Branch land nearby Fish Creek. Many of the others who were with them found the land too inhospitable and left forthwith for Alberta colonies. My ancestors, though, remained there, digging a hole and covering it over and living therein throughout their first winter. Have you ever experienced a winter on the prairies, Anyhow, one of my maternal grandmother's nephews was, ironically, Honorable Edward Dimitro Beta, Chief Justice of Saskatchewan, 1981 to 2006, and another was, Bishop Briab Joseph Beta. Both of these great men emerged from the same frozen hole in the ground that I did, but, whilst they were raised as whites, I was raised with savage Indians and half-breeds, and forced to fight daily from kindergarten and grade 6. Even once being traumatically mobbed at the urging of our abusive teacher Mrs. Olesko, and it took me hours of running and hiding and fighting to finally get away from the agitated mob, my riotous peers. The violence I faced growing up carried over into my adolescence, when I began hanging out downtown, but I never ever initiated any of the violence which my life was mired in. Although having good exuved bloodlines, with no less than 14 blood ties to the First Nations, and Franco-Métis bloodlines leading back to Honorable François-Jacques Bruno, and both Gabriel Dumont and St. Louis David Riel des Métis, and even Lee Patriot Louis Joseph Papineau. Furthermore, I am a direct ancestor of the first French family, and it is my ancestors which have suffered the growing pains of this nation long before the English came into possession of the land or the Dominion of Canada was formed by the Fathers of Confederation. I mention this only because I have always been rejected by both the white and Indian societies, and, although the government afore then always considered me a white man, as did the Indians, I am not. But neither am I an Indian nor a Métis. I consider me a true Canadian, whose citizenship cannot be purchased as with a piece of paper, as the foreign-born are so doing here in Canada today. Even you, dear reader, cannot make the same claim to Canadian identity as I, so, I ask you, how is it that you have such power over me as to be in the position to determine whether or not I am a law-abiding citizen, when you have always had white privilege and the money to purchase your innocence, and I have always been dirt poor and had to fight with savages since childhood, and am guilty by my very nature, as had been the Quebecois under the domination of the Kirk brothers and the Acadians, who were forcibly deported. But I diverge, sorry. I thought it essential to establish my love of this country as being a part of my heritage and not something divested upon me by our government. I felt I needed to explain why I was poor and how it has affected me, so that I have had the misfortune to have fallen into disrepute with the authorities. How am I any different than Jean-Baptiste Kitchi Manitowoc, Almighty Voice, or Sik Oscitis, Charcoal, or Rje Wham, Scraping Hide, except that I am not an Indian? Was it not the Canadian government and circumstance alone which causeth them to be remembered as great criminals? So too with me, it is only circumstance which hath brought me before you, figuratively speaking, thrown in chains at thy feet to plead my case and beg for my life. When a civilization forgets its ancestors, they soon stop thinking of their descendants. In endeavoring to injure my good name and reputation, these common low-life gutter rats with badges, knowing full well how this despicable rap looks on my permanent record, tried to frame me for a crime which I did not commit. Yet, you can at least seal my record so that it does not stigmatize my future any more than it already has. After all, if there had been an actual crime committed by me against this girl, wouldst not the police surely have arrested and processed me, bringing me before a judge in a criminal court of law and trying me for the alleged offence, and, if having found me not innocent but guilty, then convicting me for the offence? But there was in truth actually no offence committed by me against this poor, dumb girl, Miss Beester. There was merely an accusation perjured against me by her, and the criminal manipulation of her vulnerable ignorance by the Regina City Police Department representatives, who thus tried to condemn me, for which I am now, 17 years later, still being further persecuted by you, the Canadian Parole Board. Yet, it was people just like yourselves which recently released the Chinese cannibal Vince Lee from custody, freeing him, losing him upon the unsuspecting hoi polloi as if he'd done nothing wrong. Conversely, Luca Magnotta has been put away for life. Is this reverse racism? Or what? The one is insane and the other not so. Lee only terrorized a busload of unsuspecting travelers in the middle of nowhere late at night, horribly murdering and mutilating and devouring the young Métis man's face, but I guess that's not as bad as chopping up a foreign exchange student, et also. Even Lee wants to be killed, and put out of our misery. I feel so very sorry for Tim McLean's family. What a slap in the face, by the Minister of Justice and the Canadian government. There is no justice in Canada whatsoever, and has been none since the expulsion of the Acadians, 1755–64. So, once more I say, how can pardoning me bring cause disrepute to the administration of justice? Or, any more disrepute than it has already cloaked itself in? And so too did people just like you here in BC recently release Alan Schoenborn, who murdered his own children. I ask you, where is the justice? You may say that she is blind and wields a sharp two-edged sword, but so does the Archangel Michael, and though you say that she weighs the truth, so does ma outweigh the soul against the ostrich feather of the truth. And is it not a fact that the judicial system has more than once imprisoned the innocent and allowed guilty recidivists to go free? Such as Pakistani terrorist Arshad Muhammad. I know that I am not the only innocent which you are lording your enormous power over. For example, in 1987 Anthony Hain Maier was charged with a knife-point assault of a 15-year-old girl, wrongfully convicted and sentenced to 2 years less a day in jail, and, even though rapist and murderer Paul Bernardo confessed to the crime in 2006, it still took 2 years to acquit the man. Simon Marshall, too, was wrongfully convicted and jailed, 1997 to 2003, but, in 2006, he was awarded the highest wrongful conviction compensation to date, in Quebec. All I'm saying is, the government and its representatives are not perfect and, being human, are liable to make mistakes. Please don't let me be one of your mistakes, I deserve better. Still, I am not afraid of Amit within the everlasting flames of the lake of fire, which burneth cold but do not consume. Yes, I know that I am guiltless of this shame which hath been unjustly heaped upon me by these self-righteous liars who have long ago forgotten about me, them having said and done their worst to hurt me, to molest and terrorize me to the fullest extent of the law. But you who have so much privilege have the power and authority to relieve me of this distress, this shame, this false charge against me, a nameless nobody who cannot even purchase his own justice for a price, or his freedom for lack of Karen's obol. Now, is it not a fact that the National Council of Welfare has long been concerned about the poor treatment of low-income Canadians under our justice system? Unfairly giving preferential treatment to the wealthy, such as Christopher Michael Groves, who only received a year in prison, 2 years probation and a 250 hours of community service for pushing the poor little street waif, Ariana Harley Simpson, under a bus, in 2009. Crime and delinquency are found amongst the poor because that's where they are sought. Is it not as much true that police officers are vulnerable to bias? Inevitably bringing too many low-income people before the courts to be tried, convicted, and sentenced, whilst the more affluent are less likely to come to the attention of authorities. With such exceptions such as India-born government officials in the Gordon Campbell administration, Udhi Singh, Dave, Basie and Robert Bobby Singh Virk, and others involved in the 2003 BC legislature raids. Compared to all law enforcement policies and practices for common crimes, law enforcement efforts towards uncovering white-collar and corporate offences, which are more likely not to be reported as common crimes, are minuscule, with the exception of the recent government purge of Canadian senators, which amounts to nothing more than a witch hunt intending to deal a death blow to the Red Chamber. Examples. Even our most eminent forebearer Abraham Martin de l'Écossais was once accused of atrocities towards a young Quebecois girl, and jailed on February 15, 1649 for the act. He may have been guilty but I am not. So too was Huguenot Daniel Vuille accused of atrocities towards Barbe Holly, not yet age 16, daughter of Jean-Baptiste Holly and Mathurin Vallet, direct ancestors of mine. Vuille was accused of witchcraft and sorcery and imprisoned in February 1660, 32 years before the Salem witch trials. Governor Darganson and Bishop Laval fought to bring him to trial, the one civilly and t'other ecclesiastically, a military rather than a civil execution. In the end, 8 months later, Daniel Vuille became the first man ever executed by a l'arquebusade firing squad in Canada. He may have been guilty, but I am most certainly not guilty. In February 1664, Robert Hatch, an Indian, violated young Marthe Hubert née Fontaine de Isle d'Orléans while he was drunk. Shortly after being taken prisoner, Hatch escaped. The procureur du roi, royal councillor, summoned Chief Tecouarimat of the Algonquin in Quebec, Chief Caet Magnicus aka Boyer of Tadoussac, Chief Magouche of the Nipissinian, Chief Kahikawan of the Iroquois, Chief Nakoapiaith did le Samanier of, and Abenaki Captain Jean-Baptiste Pipoaraki to appear before the Conseil Souverain to answer for Robert Hatch and be formally advised that the penalty for rape was hanging and strangling. By hanging it is inferred that the victim be placed in a cage large enough to contain their entire body but small enough so as to deny them any sort of movement whatsoever, and, after they are locked in it, this is put on public display with the public being encouraged and sometimes blatantly ordered to harass and degrade the victim. He may have been guilty, but I am most certainly not guilty. Although Nicholas Marsollet may have warranted young Esperance's charge that he'd importuned her with indecent advances and was accused of threatening her with death. He may have been guilty, but I am most certainly not guilty. I am no more culpable of young Miss Beester's charge than was Joseph when so accused by Potiphar's wife. Champlain adopted 3 Montagne girls, Foi, Esperance and Charite, Faith, Hope and Love. Foi returned to the wilderness. Champlain wanted to take the other 2 girls to France, but Marsollet had intervened. They ended up living with Guillaume Quillard until the woods reclaimed them, too. Esperance's sister Charite threatened to eat Marsollet's heart, but not out of love, as Gismunda, who wept over Giscardo's heart, in Boccaccio's Decameron, 4th Day, or as Dante, whose heart was fed to his dead beloved Beatrice by the spectre of Virgil according to Dante, Vita Nuova, enigmatic 3rd chapter. But out of hate, as Guglielmo di Rosiclian, who fed his wife her lover's heart, Boccaccio, Decameron, 4th Day, or as adulterous Sirmonda, who was also fed the heart of Guillaume de Cabestany, her lover, by her husband, Raymond de Castel Rosselon, causing her to throw herself to death out a window, Boccaccio, Decameron, 4th Day, even as legend has it that Vlad Dracul's first wife threw herself out a window on learning the false news that her husband had died in battle. As in Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 film, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Dracula's wife, played by Winona Ryder, commits suicide learning that her lover had been killed in battle. Upon learning of her fate, a victorious Dracula condemns God and damns himself by drinking her blood, which creates him a vampire. Now mark, I say that Miss Beester in making this accusation is as cruel and licentious as was Baal worshipping Jezebel, a treacherous schemer and accursed woman who was thrown out a window by eunuchs and eaten by dogs, but I do not say throw Beester to the dogs. Why? What would that accomplish? Nothing, yet, if you chose to throw me to the dogs instead, which is possible as justice is blind and subject to human frailties. I am in fact actually innocent of the charge of sexually touching her and uttering death threats to her. Isn't it just as easy for you now to make such an error of judgment? As happened away back in the day when an innocent David Milgiard was found guilty of raping and murdering poor little nurse's aide Gail Miller in Saskatoon, in 1969, which happened in my childhood neighbor and involved families such as the Fishers, whose younger brothers and sisters I was going to school with. The big difference now is that once you've made up your mind as to my innocence or guilt in this matter, it is final and there can be no appeals. My God, even the cops in Saskatoon which were alleged to have driven their indigenous problems on those long Starlight tours, 2000, from which, for some, there was to be no return, got a better deal, they got a paid vacation during the trial. They were above the law, above guilt and shame, whether innocent or not, I assure you that I am even more innocent than them, and, although I am in a great deal of trouble for Miss Beester's unfounded accusation, it is just that. An unsubstantiated allegation and nothing else. I say that Beester made up her charge in the heat of the moment merely to spite me. Like I said, the adulterous fabulist had been asleep naked on top of Rosetta's marriage bed, the door was wide opened. Maybe she dreamed it or woke up stone-drunk and delusional and assumed my intentions towards her were such, or maybe she was just angry because I'd seen her in the raw and wasn't turned on by her embarrassed flesh. Who knows, she was obviously affected by emotional instability or mental illness, suffering from some sort of Lady Godiva complex. I really don't see how this incident differs from the allegations made against Vancouver Island teacher Donald Barber in 2012. It's a known fact that women make false accusations of domestic violence in an attempt to destroy innocent men's lives, such as the wife of Potiphar. There is a tendency for women to emphasize what they feel happened rather than what actually happened, or, rather, even outright lie about it without any compelling motive. Moreover, women's feelings are often influenced by outside parties in whom she has confided, any of whom can interpret her emotion as a sign of felonious abuse, with little or no evidence. As Elijah wandered the wilderness, wherein Christ was tempted by the Satan, after being rebuked by Jezebel's rage, as conceived by John Milton, Paradise Regained, Book 2, verse 313, so too have I wandered through my days and nights since this allegation of sexual assault hath been laid against me, and, me the unwitting fool thinking that the matter was long ago dealt with and forgot about. Closing remarks. In closing, allow me to say that just because someone says the sky is not blue but black simply because space is black doesn't make it so, yet it doesn't mean sunlight is blue, either, and, although we color the sun yellow, it looks white. Similarly, we are free to believe whatever we chose to believe and argue truth and justice as though they were carved in stone, but people are still going to worship their golden calf, aren't they? They are going to think and believe as they like, even to the point of closing their ears to truth and waggling lies off their tongues, deceiving others or apologizing for and covering up the despicable actions of the true perverted criminals, such as former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, who blocked plans to strip pedophile Sir Peter Hayman of his knighthood in 1984, even though she knew that he was a member of the Pedophile Information Exchange, PI, and had been recently convicted of gross indecency with another man in a public toilet. At one time people believed the heavenly bodies moved around the earth, despite even prehistoric navigators knowing better, until Galileo and Copernicus changed our thinking. People also believed in a flat earth paradigm, until Christophe Colomb proved otherwise, and it has always been common knowledge that heaven and hell are actual places above and below us, as best exemplified in Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Still, Buddha, Pythagoras, Zoroaster, Socrates, Plato, and Christ, to name just a few, have all proven differently over the millennia. But, to call a person an unrehabilitatable criminal goes against nature, because in most people there is a spark of the divine, albeit people like Carla Holmoka or Robert Picton or Daniel Peru or Vince Lee make one to wonder, why no? If you label me thus a criminal, on the word of one person, then the divine in me can only be smothered, by the slanderous lies and deceptions perjured against me. As St. John the Divine Evangelist wrote in his pericope Adultery, John 7:53-8:11, and painted by Peter Bruegel in Christ and the Woman Taken in Adultery, which was thus interpreted by Ambrose, Terra terram accusat, earth accuses earth, refer to the cover. So it is that I in all humility say, please, don't do that, too. Consider this, I'm not so labeling, nor libeling, them, mine accusers, I'm merely stating that things didn't happen quite the way they were reported, especially in the alleged sexual assault charge, 1998, but just as much concerning ye's obstruction and mischief charges, 2000. These allegations made against me have been elaborated upon and exaggerated by people whom had personal grudges against me and stood to gain, in the very least, hubristic and narcissistic self-satisfaction by troubling me, through people like you, under circumstances like this, which, if these persons were made aware of my present cat and mouse predicament, would be happy and find some sort of Caligulaean pleasure in my misfortune. Furthermore, I am simply stating, quite contrary to mine accusers, Miss Beester, Yabbit the Frogmouth, Noman the Traitor, and those certain criminals with badges employed by the Regina City Police Department, notably the rogues Ron and Terry and the thin blue line which protected them. These bastards, knowing full well the depth of the problems they were creating for me, both with the authorities, such as yourselves, and with the convicts, shouldst I ever have the misfortune of falling away from the law and being incarcerated in a penitentiary, where I would surely be branded either a rapist or a child abuser because of this unfortunate incident, and thereby suffer most dire consequences for it, undeservedly so, too. If there are any true criminals involved in this matter between Miss Beester, Yabbit, Noman, and myself, then it is those certain badge officers of the City of Regina Police Department, who drew their thin blue line in the sand and denied me justice in the matter concerning the two criminal constables, Ron and Terry, which beat me nigh unto death, robbed me of my buckskin jacket with fringes and left me as one dead in the alley, in June 1998. Even as I am assumed guilty in the Bouchard affair, these militants all lied the same lie and protected their own and further persecuted me so that I was forced to give up my homeland on the prairies and move far away from family and friends across the Rocky Mountains, entirely alone in the world, and start my life anew here in Victoria, BC, on the west coast. Thus, in 400 years, my first French family bloodline hath flowed from its origins in France to Nouveau France, Acadia and Quebec, and from Scotland and England to Canada, mixing with native bloodlines as Le Natio Meacutatis and flowering, quick becoming the true Canadian identity, a heritage founded in an explorer/coureur des bois/voyageur/fur trapping/mountain man/buffalo hunting culture, which hath suffered our nation's birth pangs being the taproot of this nation, this great nation established on the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors, both white and native, without which there would have never been an Ottawa nor a CPR, until, at last, I am now here, an exile unable to return home even if I wanted to, because I am poorer now than before and without a hope that my prosperity will get better, but just as much because I know what awaits me there, people like Ron and Terry. Thus, I appeal to you, put an end to my current disparagement, find this sad issue in my favor and close the files on me once and for all. Methinkest I deserve at least this much from my government, especially since it's spreading our political legs like an egotistical whore in heat, opening our country to ever-increasing third-world immigration and allowing myriads of foreign-born polygamists with their child brides, criminal and/or terrorist-producing families and even child soldiers. Citizenship, giving these new Canadians a chance for a future regardless of their past histories, knowing full well all the while that it is because of them there is more homelessness, as these newcomers are given preference in jobs, such as with temporary foreign workers or under government-sponsored work programs, displacing homegrown native-born people of their financial security and dwellings, especially as is happening in Vancouver, which is slowly being bought up by Chinese investors. And Punjabis which refuse to adopt to our established languages and customs, or even as the Hudson's Bay Company was sold to the Jew Jerry Zucker and NRDC Equity Partners in the USA and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority of the United Arab Emirates etc., and, of course, inflation, and despoliation of our once beautiful northern resources by corporatocratic plutocrats and foreign investors. How is such a small person as myself in the face of these great Canadian calamities even comparable? Why is it that I have been assumed guilty without a trial? And is it not now too late to try me for this supposed crime which I supposed to have committed so long ago? Which is no doubt even forgotten of by my accusers. No. Then why have you declared my guilt in this matter when I am innocent and the allegations made against me are false? What can I, a nameless nobody, say or do to wash my hands of this dirty business? Nothing at all. As it's entirely up to you, whether I did this bad deed which I am so wrongfully accused of doing or not. As it simply boils down to their word, or, more specifically, her word, against mine. I ask you, have I not given you reason to doubt her word? An iota of qualm. Please do not hesitate to believe me when I say that I did not sexually touch nor threaten with death young Miss Bouchard, nor do I hold any ill will against her for having claimed that I had. As said. It were. Notably the rogues Ron and Terry and the thin blue line which protected them. Who found themselves in an opportune situation to sport with me, opportunistically collaborating on their punk conspiracy to besmirch my reputation, which is why I have found me now here at some needs to compose this letter to you and argue my innocence. I could never have imagined such mendacity nor believe that anyone would stoop so low as to spread such a rumor, an utter lie about me, thinking to make a reproach of my character and disparage my name such. Yet, we, you and them and myself, all know that there is no way to prove what really happened betwixt her and me, yet or nay, so it basically boils down to this, who do you believe? Thus said, me, I stoop down to write on the ground with my finger. In the 12-volume authorized version of the Jewish Talmud it condones sexually repugnant relations with children as young as age 3. Isn't this something that ISIL also condones? The Islamic Antichrist Muhammad married a rich old woman first, and later, amongst his other brides, he wed a 9-year-old girl. Both religions are spawned in the child-murdering pedophile Abraham at the dawn of history, in Job's time. Even Jesus' mother, like Tamar and Rahab before her, was a temple prostitute until the age of 12, when the pedophiliactic Jewish Sanhedrin priests, who were practicing eugenic breeding even then, married her off already pregnant to Joseph the carpenter of Nazareth. And yet, even in our own country, as at the beginning of French colonization, opposed to Cardinal Richelieu's blessing upon interracial marriages and of the creation of a mi-acutatis nation to people Nouveau France, French authorities obligated the colonists to reproduce a French colony, and they therefore had huge families. If their virgin daughters weren't married off by age 16, parents were brought before the court and made to answer for it. Even Champlain signed a marriage contract with Hélène Boulle, age 10, although they didn't cohabitate for a couple of years. In fact, there were many child brides amongst the French Canadian inhabitants and, later, the Bois Brûlés, of French, Scottish, English, and European descent, for many generations until the close of the 19th century. A custom still practiced in secret by polygamous Mormons, such as at Bountiful, and certain new Canadians of Muslim extraction, too many of which are on welfare and collecting social services, issued checks for their primary wives and other monies for their secondary wives, declaring them dependents, and baby bonuses umpteen children. But I am now, as I was then, as ever before, a practicing celibate, who never ever once considered raising a family to be supported by the taxpayer, like the wild Indians which laughed at me, saying, "We'll retake our land back through breeding," but that was almost 40 years ago, long before PM Pierre Trudeau opened up the floodgates of immigration as did Clifford Sifton years before him, which, considering today's status quo of Hollywood's sexualization of Goyim children, the homosexualization of the churches, multiculturalism, and immigration in the case of an ethnically diversified global village, which amounts to nothing more than white genocide and the outright utter destruction of Western civilization. It's no wonder that I sometimes become melancholy and contemplate regret for not fooling around with the myriad young women which entrusted them to me, despite their Lolita-like sexual availability as made plausible by the Zio Media's propagandist monarch MK Ultra programming of mind-washing gullible child sex kittens, such as successfully brought Madonna, Britney Spears and Miley Cyrus into the public eye. And now that the American courts have pushed the gay marriage agenda into law, forcing even the churches into subjugation to their corrupt sense of righteousness and justice, the real pedophiles have begun to argue that their misunderstood love relationships with children become mainstream. Hey! Go figure it, et. Well, as I've said, with all the frickin' Muslims they're importing, it just may come to pass that once their child brides become more and more so acceptable, just like with the pedophiles and the homosexuals, such as the Glastonbury couple, George Harris and Douglas Worth, who raped at least 5 of their 9 adopted sons, or the perverted Jewish lesbian couple, Pauline Moreno and Deborah Lobel, who gave sex change hormones to their adopted disabled son Thomas Tammy Lobel, thence, I guess. So too will the proud and lusty homos begin to openly engage our nation's young boys and girls in sexual marriages, as they've promised to do in the Gay Manifesto, just like the royal riches in Britain, such as Lord Janner or even Prince Andrew, or billionaire pedophile Jerry Epstein, or international fugitive Roman Polanski, or as the pedophiliac Roman Catholic priests, especially those which ran the residential schools in Canada. Meanwhile, even here in Canada, according to prescription of Sharia law, young Muslim girls are forcibly circumcised, against their will, and this is a thing which is widely known of but not talked about. And, even now in Britain, the first female Sharia law judge has issued a brazen warning that the government cannot ask Muslim men not to have more than one wife, exposing secret polygamy much to chagrin of the tax-paying, predominantly Christian citizenry. 70% of American Muslims believe the U.S. should legalize polygamy, which no doubt includes arranged marriages to child brides. And, as non-Muslim laws and customs must always give way to Islamic law, it is insane not to believe that the Imams have their own secret police at work in Western civilization, undermining our cultural heritage and our ethical values, and our future. Federica Mogherini, the European Union's head of foreign affairs and security, has gone on record, saying, political Islam should be part of the picture, promoting Islam, one of the most repressive forces on the planet, reducing women to mere possessions, subjugated sex toys and child bearers, and allowing for extrajudicial murder such as stoning and slash or beheading. This is being condoned by our government, too, even encouraged and rewarded. So I ask you, why are these newcomers, these new Canadians, considered law-abiding citizens whilst I am assumed guilty on the word of an alleged slut, a known criminal, nomen, an adulterous libertine, yabbit, and the prejudiced members of the Regina City Police Department, those which beat the living hell out of me and left me as dead in a dark alley, and those accomplices after the fact which knowingly covered up the crime, without my ever having had opportunity to prove my innocence under due process of law, as in the case of the alleged sexual offence, which was stayed for lack of evidence, and as in the obstruction and mischief charges, in 2000, as well, whilst the isolated incident of the post-conviction liquor offence was biased on the basis that I was a poor street person and therefore obviously guilty, prima facie, and this is the sole reason that I was incarcerated in this instance, and this was a miscarriage of justice, too. Stroth, why no, if and I had been more sexually active and prone to fucking those girls which were my friends in those days when this awful allegation of sexual assault was made against me, then you might be able to justly label me an ephebophiliac, but that's just not the case. Which is so why many of those young girls, and boys, which I knew then are still my friends. And, although people ofttimes say and do stupid things when drunk, as I myself have admitted to having done more than once in the past, this is simply not the case in this particular instance. Oi oi oi, I am just a poor dumb schmuck, an inculpable dummkopf who found him in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people under the wrong circumstances, which is exactly what happened when the miscreant Nomen betrayed me before, as I've stated at the beginning of this document, and, thus, it only goes to show, as the philosopher de Sada proved so thoroughly in his libertarian novel Justine, the misfortunes of virtue. Bad things do happen to good people. Yet, in thinking about how stupid it is that political correctness endorses teaching our prepubescent children about homosexuality and transsexuality and masturbation in grade school and groups such as the Girl Guides, now accepting wimpy pansy boys into their midst, or schools which must now designate certain bathrooms for children which are unsure about their sexuality. Since when did children begin to have concerns about their sexuality? Meanwhile, people like Margot Kaplan are pushing pedophilia and white guilt and paving the way for Sharia law. Margot Kaplan, assistant professor at Rutgers School of Law, Camden. Refer to New York Times op-ed Monday, October 6, 2014. Pedophilia, a disorder not a crime, PA 23. How can I not mention these social phenomena? And not but wonder about the absurdity of this situation miring me in filthy, despicable lies. Still, I am forced to endure this stigmatic episode simply because she said so and they the cops wanted it to be such so that they made it seem such, and, as I've said before, others such as Yabbit and Nomen would take evil pleasure in learning of my sad predicament. If these words which I have written exposing the mitigating circumstances which underlay the alleged sexual assault, and the corresponding obstruction/mischief charge, have failed to convince you otherwise and softened thy judgment, then I can think of nothing which I should say which will appease your suspicions as aroused by these vicious rumors wrongfully alleged against me. Yet, it is common knowledge that some women with little or no evidence do not hesitate to accuse men, some even going so far as to willfully lie. Thus, having been falsely accused, am I going to be considered guilty for the rest of my life, although I am innocent of the false allegation? One last time, in all earnestness, I appeal to you. I did not touch Miss Beester, and it is not she but me who is the injured party in this unfortunate debacle, this Kafkanian miscarriage of justice. Concerning the 2006 Liquor Act offence. Just prior to this charge, I had been in Vancouver visiting my youngest half-brother, Maurice, and his family. They gave me a brand new laptop computer so that I might be able to write more efficiently, for which I am eternally grateful as that present has changed my life for the better. Anyhow, upon returning home and once settled back into my daily routine, I took this brand new laptop computer on a visit to acquaintances who lived downtown in the Ritz Hotel, my old residence, and, bringing a six-pack of canned beer, we watched a movie together. So I was there about 2 hours, and the four of us shared the 6 beer and watched the movie. Then I left to return home. I thought to pick up another 6-pack to bring home and so stopped at a nearby liquor sales outlet, at the Strathcona Hotel, in downtown Victoria, but was denied service by the clerk. And I know not why. Being stubborn, I refused to leave without the sale transpiring, yet, the clerk laughed at me and phoned the police, who came and took me away to jail and placed me in a cell, where I remained until later that night. Whilst there in that cell I heard the bastards on duty playing around with my brand new computer, for I heard the Windows program open up, and I called out that they had no warrant to do so. Not that it mattered to them. Anyhow, during the duration of my stay there in city cells, one of the other incarcerated men was whining and crying out, suffering withdrawal symptoms methinketh, so, to bring calm the situation I thought to sing Molly Malone, and in so doing calmed the poor soul and brought silence to the scene. Do not doubt this, for I once sang to a tree full of hundreds of chattering starlings, and they too fell silent for some time to listen to me. When the Victoria City Police released me, I went home straightway, and it was when I got there that I discovered irreparable damage to my laptop screen, for one of the culpable blue meanies had obviously picked it up by the top of the screen and thereby, in mishandling it, broke it. Of course, as I've said before, they hid this fact from and hurried me out of lockup so that I didst not have chance to think of checking it for damage before leaving, and why wouldst I think such? After all, were they not the police, right, et trustable? But, oh no, not so. Like children which have been bad, these representatives of law and order took no responsibility for their childish wrongdoing, and I was, thereby, once again fucked over and denied any sort of justice by an authority figure, putting the administration of justice, once again, into disrepute. An even sadder betrayal was wrought about by Dr. James Ballard, aka Quack Lard Ball, a pretentious family physician who outright lied to me, telling me that I was going to die, and forthwith sent me to Dr. Christian von Westerp, aka Ratspew MD, mentally defective, for an unnecessary medical treatment. Thus, under this auspicious charlatan's care, I was poisoned with radioactive iodine and sent home with instructions to stay away from children and contact him in 6 weeks. So, after 6 weeks had passed, I called Ratspew to make an appointment, as instructed to do, which was made for 6 weeks later. Yet, whilst this time passed, I began to suffer unnecessarily, plagued with stomach cramps, muscle cramps, even in my fingers and toes, sleeplessness, waking hallucinations, and neurosis, to the extent of coming to the belief that an extinction event rooted in global warming, HARP technology and weather modification was occurring, and that a secret society more powerful than our government was openly executing the useless eaters one by one, and that Satan-worshipping bacchanalians lived in the rooms next to mine and were intent on my destruction, and of the ghastly Human Dignity Act, which I imagined was being read to the useless eaters prior to their public executions. This was the new unwritten law of the land. My suffering caused long, sleepless nights of twisting, writhing agony, and my hair began falling out. I ran my fingers through my hair and showed Lard Ball, but he denied it, saying, "Your hair is not falling out." Yet, it was, and most of the hair on my fingers, toes, and limbs, underarms and shoulders, which I'd grown accustomed to having all my life, has never grown back. I began to doubt Lard Ball and Ratspew. I told people who might have been able to help me, but they wouldn't believe my allegations that I had been unnecessarily poisoned with radioactive iodine by these two hypocrites so they could bill the government for their medical services rendered. I tried to complain to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, but to no avail. Again, I was screwed over by people in trusted positions of authority over me, and given no recourse to complain. My health is all screwed up now, gone haywire, and I oft have recourse to admit me to emergency with the most agonizing of abdominal pains and violent nausea which the doctors cannot accurately diagnose. It was during this time that I was assaulted by the AIDS-infected Manster Dean Marcy. And, in defending me, I put myself at risk of inadvertently contracting the dread disease through a blood-to-blood transfusion which could have been brought about by striking him so as to tear my knuckles and thereby sharing blood contact with the violent degenerate. This I was aware of whilst we battled, right there on the city's busiest street corner, and whilst our conflict waged on, people, even a woman pushing a stroller, walked through the battleground as if nothing out of the ordinary was going on. Which surprised me. For it was a terrible struggle in which my shirt had been ripped off and my cane had been broken over my head, Marcy attempting to stab me in the abdomen with the broken end. After the battle, with sirens nearing, as Marcy fled the scene, I sat there waiting for the police to arrive, and there was at least one vampiric bystander which was drawn to the scene by the chinook smell of blood. After this incident, Marcy, who was my neighbor, and many of his junkie loser associates made my life so miserable that I elected to cease attending the mission for breakfast, for they were pushing me to fight, and I didst not want to. It was during these long sleepless nights and waking hallucinations that I had visions. Princess Diana appeared to me in a long sparkling dress and, smiling kindly upon me suffering upon my bed, spake unto me, saying, "Tell my son Harry that my hand is in his." For a very long time I deliberated on the meaning of this, coming to the conclusion that she favoured him, yet, I have since learned, it is Prince William which favoured his mother. Nonetheless, I now believe that Prince Harry is in fact he whom Nostradamus prophesied of in his quatrains, calling him, Cirencelini. Another, more prodigious, waking hallucination was that of the Carmelite St. Aristolesia, the little flower of the holy face of the child Jesus, who appeared at my bedside, sitting with me, running her fingers through my hair, and as she did so, my pain subsided and I fell asleep. This has very much influenced my life. As I was not drunk or belligerent or mischievous at the time, I can only think that the reason I spent the night in lockup was because I was a poor street person. After all, this is the city of the newlywed and the nearly dead, et. And the motto is, Ado Viaticus, and for no other reason. I have reason to call it Ville de Merde because since arriving here I've had the misfortune to see junkies wandering around with shit-covered fingers, shit-smeared walls on an important building downtown, a tourist attraction, which was left so defaced for no less than 6 months, although I complained about much earlier, the disgusting old hobo which got onto the bus with shit-stained pants, the foul-smelling fecal matter still in his pants, human and animal poop on busy downtown streets, once, watching a dog squat to poop, leaving its poop on the sidewalk. I beheld the pedestrian traffic walking not over it or around it but stepping in it and carrying it away with them so that it became nothing more than a stain on the concrete. Not to mention all the unflushed toilets it has been my misfortune to have witnessed since arriving here 15 some years ago. This, in all truth, is a city full of richers, and ass-kissers, and ruled by a strict British caste system wherein I am the lowest head on the totem pole, and shit slides downhill. It is for this discriminatory reason alone that I was taken into custody and locked up without a breathalyzer, which would have proved me sober, and, as a result of my prejudiced incarceration, had my brand new laptop computer broken by the on-duty guards in gaol. Does not this isolated incident also bringeth the administration of justice into disrepute, or is it more convenient for you to justify my guilt and deny me, yet, once again, of justice? Note. Once, in Saskatoon, c. 1982, I had recourse to apply to the Human Rights Commission for the city police were harassing me, being one of the first noticeable new wave punkers, and they didn't like me because of this. I was even arrested once because of the way I dressed and cut my hair, being one of the first to wear a mohawk, and for no other reason. Anyhow, the HRC saith unto me, "Then, you are on the bottom of the totem pole, being a young, single, white male." So, I learned to live with this, even as I learned to live with the abuses I was suffering because of certain members of the Regina City Police 10 years later, and as I have had to learn to live with the betrayal of lardball and rat spew, now, here in Victoria, made permanently dependent upon pharmaceuticals because these two shameful shams, both profited from robbing me of my good health. Thus, it amuses me when you suggest that I might bring the administration of justice into disrepute if my record is suspended. Who am I to expect any different? A summary re-examination of my criminal behavior. Having thus explained myself, I accept full responsibility for only 3 of my charges, the 1979 concealed weapons rap, and the 1986 mischief rap, and the 1998 impaired driving rap. The 2000 obstruction and mischief charges were exaggerated claims made against me by Officer Yi, whom, infatuated with seeking to inflate both his own personal ego, at my expense, and establish himself as a hero amongst the racist white cops of the Regina Police Department, who formed their thin blue line and denied me any sort of justice at all after I was so grievously beaten and left for dead, robbed of my buckskin jacket with long sleeves and fringes, horribly mutilated and hospitalized and refused necessary medical care by badge officers Ron and Terry, in 1998, and their compatriots, those morons who protected these 2 maleficent criminals after this brutality, continued to harass and torment me until I at last gave up and moved away forever, them thusly bringing the administration of justice into disrepute, whether you choose to believe it or not. Thank you for patiently reading my words. I have spoken like a common man because I am a common man, a poor, uneducated man of the prairies, an ignorant half-breed and a hick. It has not been my intent to insult your intelligence, but to elicit your wisdom. Neither do I speak to you as I would to my peers, for I am a lowly street person and not unfamiliar with holding out my hat on the street begging or lining up at the local missions, as I have done since about the time of my first charge, in 1979. I have attempted to speak plainly and simply because I am plain and simple, and poor, alas, so that I could not afford a lawyer to represent me and speak upon my behalf. It shouldst be obvious for educated persons such as your esteemed selves to see that I am, in all humility, genuinely repentant for my crimes and that I have explained the nature and gravity of my crimes sufficiently for you to have quick become to the forgiving conclusion that I, in fact, not only do in fact meet the legal requirements to obtain a record suspension etc., but wouldst not put the administration of justice into disrepute, having proven this by staying of Her Majesty's cells since my last charge, in 1998, when I was found driving in Saskatoon with more than 80 mgs of alcohol in my blood, for which I was then and still am deeply ashamed and wholeheartedly regretful of having done so, excepting, of course, the more recent Liquor Act offence, in 2006, whereof I spent the night in the Huskow not because I was drunk, having only consumed 2 beers during the course of a movie and some socialization with neighborly acquaintances, but was incarcerated merely on a biased misinterpretation of the prima facie evidence, the arresting officers having arrived with the preconceived opinion that I was disturbing the peace when, in all truth, I was not, and them deciding that I was obviously drunk and disorderly simply because I was poor and shabby and in a supposedly classy place, a snooty establishment wherein I have never returned and have no intention of ever doing so again. In short, I may not dress like you want, or think like you want, or speak like you want, or believe in what you believe in, or want what you want, but does that make me any less of a law-abiding citizen than you who have enjoyed privilege in your life, whilst I have had to fight Indians since I was a toddler in diapers and have had to struggle in my entire life so that if I am poor and forced to live in cheap hotel full of disgusting degenerates who snore at night and piss with the door open and piddle pee on the floor and walk in each other's pee piddle and sit upon each other's shit stains etc., and live with the ever-present threat of bed bugs and cockroaches, and eat at the mission, whereat the street thereby is full of frightening junkies buying and selling dangerous drugs and smoking or shooting up right there on the street, sometimes with young families and children passing close by the fucking goofs, a slang term for sexual deviants, then, it must be my destiny manifest. And, if this is the punishment for my being of a criminal nature or for having lived a bad life or for being stupid, instead of chance, then, perhaps, you have no other choice but to find me undeserving of the second chance that a record suspension wouldst present me. Please do not listen to the voices of those which hate me and want to use you, my judge, jury and, if you so chose, executioner, to destroy me, a nameless nobody who is of no particular significance or importance, nothing more than a clumsy artist and an inept writer, and an unworthy bastard. I have never been good with numbers, or dates, or money. In fact, I've never really been able to tell my left from my right. Oh sure, I'm comfortable enough with words and images, but, whoa, that knock on the noggin that those cruel bastards, Ron and Terry, delivered me really scrambled my brains, so that I now have a pretty much permanent headache on the left side of my brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is associated with numbers and the right hemisphere with creativity. So please forgive me for not knowing exactly when I first met Garth Allen Mayhew, son of limner sculptress Elsa Mayhew, and grandson of the Honorable Robert Wellington Mayhew, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to Japan, 1952 to 1954. Whom hadst one night shot a man with a shotgun. The man was in his backyard, at night. A wealthy man from a wealthy family and property owner, but, I reckon, if memory serves, I first met him in the bathroom of the Sally Ann on Johnson St, Victoria, where he was washing his socks in the sink. We became friends over time, and I was eventually invited to his mother's studio and allowed to paint thereat. Therein were the molds for a sculpture which stands outside the Victoria City Police Department. I always thought him a weird duck, nonetheless, we got along well enough. I was oft invited on his many adventures, but his idiosyncranicities soon caused me to wonder why such a rich man with so many options would choose to live at the Sally Ann, an incredibly dirty place where the toilets were always overflowing and the floor always wet because of it, and thereby robbing some poor soul of a room in a city where too many people have to sleep on the streets. And he had no hesitation in staying the night in his van or renting a seedy hotel room if he felt like it. Thus, I eventually came to the conclusion that he was either hiding from something or mentally disturbed, and his strange behavior, such as hoarding and pretending to be poor, soon made me to believe it was the latter. At last, after many misadventures together and myriad reasons to be suspicious of him, such as him secretly defacing my fine oil paintings and blaming it on other innocent peoples, I finally re-evaluated the situation and came to the conclusion that he had more troubles than merely a disparaging mental health, and, for reasons which I dare not speculate upon, I began to suspect this kindly, confused old gentleman of having complicity in the disappearance of Michael Dunahy. After many years of considering the implausibility of this bizarre notion, I was finally driven by some unknown compelling force to contact the Victoria Police Department with my dubious gut feeling, and I sent an anonymous letter informing them of my suspicions, promising to reveal myself after some months so as not to bias any investigation with my relationship to Mayhew. I have only told one person that I'd betrayed my friend thus, but never have I thought of it as a betrayal because in my heart I felt more of a responsibility to the missing child than to the crazy old coot. The one person I entrusted with my secret was my youngest half-brother, Maurice, who informed me at the same time that he'd the misfortune of seeing Mayhew expose himself in the backyard, where my brother was camping with his wife and two small children. Maurice had always liked Mayhew and thought of the incident as an accident, but I knew Mayhew better and have never thought of it as anything but a purposeful attempt to expose his Gentiles to my young niece and nephew. Well, it seems to me as if some sort of double standard hath been applied to he and me. Him being, of course, innocent until proven guilty, and me guilty until proven innocent, and, in any event, the black mark against me stands as it is part of my permanent record. Yet, I truly doubt that my allegation against him has made any sort of impression on his permanent record. I believe that this is because he is rich and comes from a powerful family connected to the government, municipally, provincially, and federally, and I am a dirty bum and a no-goodnik. A criminal and a degenerate. At least, this is how you have made me feel in labeling me a miscreant offender and a non-law-abiding citizen. Further, I can't help but entertain the unsettling thought, why no, that the board is aware of this accusation which I have made against Mayhew, and holds it against me. After all, just who in the hell do I think I am making such an unsubstantiated allegation against such an important man, et? I hope that I have said enough. I suppose that I could have said more, but maybe I've said too much. I hope that I haven't rambled on nor strayed from the issues, and apologize if this is the case. Blessed are ye when men shall say bad things against ye. Matthew 5:11. Sincerely yours, Darcy-John Bouchard, Victoria, BC, Canada. July 1, 2015. Postscript: I truly hope that I am able to welcome the 150th anniversary of Canada's conception with a clean record, and only you can make this possible by sealing my permanent record, which deserves to be sealed, especially under such circumstances as described. You may, though, think yourself a superior person to me because you wear a suit and suck up such a huge wage from the taxpayers. Methinkest that y'all probably receive a 6-digit salary, whilst I am nothing more than a useless eater and a criminal struggling to exist with a modest, nay, a humble allotment of social services welfare. You may think you're superior to me as a person because you have a degree or a diploma, but I've read entire encyclopedias and dictionaries, philosophical and historical tomes, and much of the world's religious and mythological writings from antiquity to present times. You may think you're superior to me because your families have come to Canada 4 or 5 generations ago, if that, stealing the land from the Indians and taking my future from my ancestors, as the malfeasant British dragoons did to the common French Canadians when the Kirkes conquered Quebec, or after Montcalm fell to Wolfe, when my direct ancestors had to flee into the woods and hide from the rapine and pillaging of the British troops, or again, when my exiled ancestors suffered under the tyrannous yoke of Sir John A.'s fledgling mercenary Northwest Mounted Rifles, come into the great interior plains to fight Indians, raping and pillaging, burning homes and murdering innocent French-speaking and Indian women and children, for example, at Batoche in 1885, the only victims of Captain Arthur Gat Howard's Gatling gun, an American mercenary, were Marcel Grattan, 10, and an unidentified son of Wapaska. During the massacre of Keys-Kikunan's Hill, Cut Knife Hill, in 1885, good ol' Gat rained hell down upon the unsuspecting teepees wherein the starving Cree and Assiniboine were sleeping, Gatling gunning men, women, and children, and the aged and infirm with absolute abandon and disregard to human dignity, slaughtering defenseless people as they ran away, whilst the brave warriors and their boys attacked, some wielding nothing more than sticks and stones, calling out for the bloodthirsty Canadians to shoot at them instead and trying to draw their fire away from their helpless kinfolk. However, the victory belonged to Cree war chief Kamio Kisikvu, Fine Day, of the river people, and only Plains Cree chief Pitaquahanapiwian, Poundmaker, saved Colonel Otter's command from the total annihilation that Custer wrought upon the 7th Cavalry at the Little Big Horn, in 1876. If you doubt this, it's because you either chose to ignore history or deny the facts or are merely unaware of the matter. It'll take some research on your behalf, though, for to the victors go the spoils, and the truth has been hidden and a lie is being passed off as the truth. This said, therefore, I have no choice but to say, am I to be ignored or denied? If you chose to ignore my pleas for justice, fine. I've long ago accepted my lowly status quo in society. Yet, I hold no grudges. As I've said elsewhere in this document, in other words, I don't believe that the Canadian government is capable of fair dealing with the poor people of the land, such as the selling out of our pristine lakes, rivers, and streams to corporate privatization, as the Harper government did in 2012 with Bill C-38, erasing decades of environmental protection, or in the equally disgusting termination tables of the Indian Act, both being travesties of injustice. Didst not St. Louis David Riel de Métis boldly place his own neck into the noose that hanged not a man but an entire people's? Although every dog in Quebec barked in his favour. Didst our native land cry out in pain or bleed whence the Scotsman Donald Smith drove the last spike into her heart? Opening the stolen lands to the immigration schemes of foreign investors such as the railroader Jew Baron Maurice von Hirsch, creator of the Chemins de Fer Orientés, aka the Orient Express, and the Jewish Colonization Association of London and New York, who collaborated, albeit secretly, with PM Sir Wilfrid Laurier and Clifford Sifton's North Atlantic Trading Company, and John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, to disinherit Transcarpathian peoples from their ancestral homelands in Eastern and Central Europe and began peopling this once great land with stalwart peasants in sheepskin coats from the Ukraine, my own Ukrainian ancestors already homesteading in the Northwest Territories, in what became Saskatchewan, and other groups of Austro-Hungarians, Germans, Italians, Scandinavians, and Russian Doukhobors, thus, adding insult to injury and rubbing salt into the wounds suffered by the Aboriginal peoples of the Great Interior Plains after the Canadian invasion of the Northwest Territories, commonly known as the Northwest Rebellion of 1885. You may ask what this has to do with anything. And I say, in response, I am merely laying the foundations of an argument illustrating the felonious assault on me by CSTS Ron and Terry and the criminal conspiracy of those members of the Regina City Police Department which shielded these deplorable peccants from true justice in forming their thin blue line to deny me my constitutional rights and quash mine civil liberties as they did, this being nothing new to my ancestors, as illustrated by the sins of the RREF in Manitoba 15 years earlier. Major Charles R. Call Bolton, for example, noted in his memoirs that after the fall of Batoche, on May 12, 1885, that every man who wanted one had his shaganini, slang terminology from British campaigns in India for a conquered woman as the booty of war and inferring the unfortunate half-breed and Indian women and girls which were raped by the pillaging mercenaries of the Northwest Rifles sent into the interior by PM John A. Macdonald, the drunkard, under the command of Major General Frederick Middleton, who was later embarrassed for his part in the theft of the poor Miakutatas possessions and, so disgraced, retired to England, which looted and burnt and ravaged the indigenous and French-speaking peoples of the land, as the British Dragoons did after the conquests of Acadia and Quebec, Nouveau France, whence these hostiles were quartered in the homes of helpless French Canadians under the orders to vigorously humiliate them by whatever aggressive means possible, including rapine and assault. And my ancestors were also amongst these poor, humbled peoples, and was done by British troops during the American Revolution, too, including soldiers enlisted from Canada and Hessian mercenaries, other such atrocities in 1885, to name just a few, included the murder of Damas A. Carrier and the rapes of Marie Therese and Elise Turand and young Miss Gervais, all ancestors of mine, and the theft of the silver-plated bell of Batoche by the Midlanders, who removed the stolen bell from its rightful place in the church of St. Antoine de Padoue to Ontario, until it was liberated by the heroic Billy Joe Delarond and his compatriots, in 1991, prior to being formally repatriated to the Métis peoples by the Canadian government in 2013. As I've said above, PM Sir John A. Macdonald was a drunkard, not unlike I once was, but for his genocidal crimes he is heralded as a hero whilst I, being a poor dumb zilch of some notoriety and insignificance, am, therefore, obviously a criminal from the crib o' the grave and in no way deserving of a record suspension, for it goes without saying that I would no doubt put the administration of justice into disrepute, et. We the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, CCLA, and Amnesty International Canada, AIC, want to ensure the United Nations, UN, Human Rights Committee is aware of a fairly long list of serious, and we would say worsening, human rights concerns. Alex Neve, AIC Secretary General, to the UN. July 2015. I say unto you, please do not allow the false allegation of sexual misconduct, 1998, stand against me forever defacing my otherwise good name, but, reiterating, it's as Gordon Campbell said and Ralph Klein inferred. I really am nothing but a useless eater. Please note that it is only because of the bias and prejudice of the thin blue line of the Regina City Police Department, who consistently harassed me, if not every member then too many of them, that I have been forever branded a disreputable enemy of the common good who consistently demonstrates antisocial behavior consistent with a non-law-abiding criminal and a would-be rapist, and, therefore, I understand your hesitation in considering me nothing less than unrehabilitatable. Why doubt them? As far as my troubles as an alcoholic are concerned, I think that you're being too harsh in judging me an unrepentable criminal. In just looking at a piece of paper. Like I've said elsewhere in this document, You high mucky mucks have no problem in letting all sorts of foreign-born aliens into my ancestral homeland, such as, for example, black African child soldiers who are nothing less than natural-born rapists and murderers, like the Somalians which have invaded Sweden and turned that great nation into the rape capital of Europe, such as 18-year-old Muhammad who brutally raped a 12-year-old girl and was sentenced to only 22 days of community service, or the 34-year-old Islamist who violently raped a dying Swedish woman, a necrophiliac who continued to sodomize his victim after she had died. I feel so sorry for what's happening right now in poor Italy and France, or, as mentioned, people like the Chinese-born cannibal Vince Li, or Air India Flight 182 bomber Inderjit Singh Riat, a hero to the Sikh community in Canada, whose photograph was presented with other members of the World Sikh Organization and the International Sikh Youth Federation, terrorist enemies of our once great nation, at a Vaisakha Day celebration in Vancouver, in 2007, attended by PM Harper's representative Jim Abbott, leader of the official opposition Jack Layton, in a makeshift turban, former Premier Gordon Campbell and the then future Premier Christy Clark, both of them dressed in Indian fashion, kowtowing and bowing and scraping the ground, supplicating themselves to foreign money and kissing ass for immigrant votes, whilst on stage the Khalistanians were calling out for the violent death of thousands of Hindus, or of the Afghani honor killers Mohammad Shafia, a polygamist, and his wife Tuba Mohammad Yahya and their son Hamd, or Indian-born gangsters such as Bindi Joel and Bal Butta and Preet, Peter, Sarbjit Gill, or even Mar Arar, who sued the shit out of our government, meaning the taxpayers, or Omar Khadr, a Taliban child soldier and bomb maker, or jihadist Zahaf Babo the Ottawa shooter, or the Canadian imams, which are here in Canada teaching children that democracy is evil, calling Canadian soldiers criminals and instructing Muslims to beat their wives and urging them to kill apostates, flog adulterers, and establish the Islamic State. Maybe I'm just stupid, but doesn't all this amount to putting our government, much less its administration of justice, into disrepute? Many, tekel, up Harson. Whence I am, truly, a highly sensitive and caring man, a clumsy writer and inept artist, maybe not as talented as an Northrop Frye or an Emily Carr or an Maud Lewis or an Roger Ing, but talented nonetheless, or so I've been told, and it is only after death that most people of my caliber are credited with having done anything purposeful or credible in life, so, whether or not my artistic/literary contributions and influence are accepted and respected by contemporary mainstream society or not, it matters not now. I will eventually be vindicated by history, and these enemies which wish to destroy me will surely be exposed as the villains they are. Thus, with respect, concerning the nature, gravity, and duration of my offences, with the unusual exception of the isolated post-conviction liquor offence in 2006, which you shouldst not faint away from considering as more tragicomical than criminal, and, disregarding Officer Yee's unfounded arrest in 2000, it should be obvious to you that I have stayed out of trouble since my 1998 DUI, 17 years ago, and, here in Victoria, I have only been involved in the one violent incident which was forced upon me by the AIDS-infected junkie Dean Marcy RIP, who, c. 2002, broke my cane over my head and tried to stab me with the broken end, and he got off the charge with a slap in the wrist, angering not only me but the other witnesses called to testify against him. In short, this too brought the administration of justice into disrepute. From now on I'm thinking only of me. I'd certainly be a damn fool to feel any other way, wouldn't I? Joseph Heller, Catch 22, Yossarian to Major Danby, ch 42 p 446. Malgar Nix. Tuesday, July 14, 2015. Afterthought. I posted my original pardon appeal yesterday, after printing it and reviewing a copy. But I realized too late that I'd failed to include my signature, so I've printed out a second copy included this afterthought. I have spoken out against certain policemen several times throughout this document, in so much as explaining the truthful facts at hand concerning my innocence or guilt. But this, in itself, doth not make me an anarchistic parasite, nay. I be merely honest in explaining certain matters pertaining to the telling of this part of my story. Suffice it to say that in the late 1970s, before my troubles began, I had seriously contemplated enlisting in the Canadian military, intent on becoming an SP, shore patrolman, in the Navy, yet, due to my not having completed grade 10, I was ineligible. And it took me until just a few years ago, after 8 attempts, to accomplish this goal. As far as hating or holding grudges against cops, in general, that's just not the case, and this is made obvious by Sober Night in the Can, in 2006, wherein I didst not make or cause any trouble for the officers, instead cooperating to the fullest and even going so far as to apologize for inconveniencing them. In short, I have nothing but respect for an orderly society and the law enforcement agents which maketh such plausible, albeit, methinketh tame for the most part to be militaristic bully boy puppets, like Constable Beadle, of the Punch and Judy show, with the hands of the neo-quislings in power shoved up their collective ass, these people having no problem in saying and doing whatever they are told to say and do, regurgitating the age-old motto. I was only following orders. Nonetheless, and notwithstanding, without such public-minded servants our civilization would break down into lawlessness and disorder under the rule of lex talionis, and the most vulnerable people in our society would suffer needlessly, for the hoi polloi are a mindless mob of riotous ignoramuses without civility or manners. There are many instances in my life where the cops have been good to me which I have not mentioned otherwise. I have mentioned Archangel Michael, knowing full well all the while that he is the protective guardian of the police. And, if they shouldst fall awry of the law, as Ron and Terry, for example, their bane, God have mercy on their souls, for their true master the devil shouldst. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Please, don't forget to pay the debt. Socrates' dying declaration. As a final note, I shouldst care to mention that I've noticed several sentence structure errors, but these, I am sure, do not hinder the reading of this document or take away from the intended meaning of the statements made. I'd care to apologize if this is the case. I most sincerely hope that this hath not been a problem for you, dear reader. Further, I know that I have on occasion strayed, inasmuch as if I were bipolar or dim-witted, yet, I thought it necessary to fully explain my misfortunes as I see them. Please remember that it is not the letter of the law which hath merit, but the spirit of the law. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. Portia. Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice, Act 4, Scene 1, 184-7. In closing, although I was eventually granted a pardon, I was unable to indulge in purchasing said pardon, for it was my younger brother, Maurice Lee Bouchard, which had financed this entire process, and he sadly passed away prior to the conclusion of this governmental extortion process. May he rest in peace. So, I do not benefit from the thousands of dollars which the government connived out of him on my behalf, and, despite deserving a full pardon, am still a criminal on record. There is no truth or justice in Canada.